Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan Percy Jackson. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by 30 Knuckles and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1. Hanahagakur no Sado. When someone dedicates their entire life working towards a single goal, normally people were ecstatic, overjoyed, perhaps even content when they achieved that lifelong dream, that one thing they strove for. But right now, as the 7th Hokage of Konoha sat in his office with one of his old teammates and his sensei before him, he had to admit there were probably one or two things that he maybe should not have done looking back on it in hindsight. Maybe if he was not so reckless in his youth in seeking power he would not find himself in this situation, maybe if he fought smarter and with more tact, he might not have had to rely so much on Kurama's power back when there was no mutual cooperation and trust. There were a lot of maybes, ifs and buts to the life he lived, people who may have lived if he had just been smarter or stronger. Then again, seeing how things turned out in the end, Naruto could honestly say he was happy with the life he had lived. He had achieved everything he had set out to do when he was a kid, he kept the promises he made to his sensei, and his parents and his family and friends were happy and safe. Naruto, you can't be serious. Given your condition, Naruto sighed, he really did love his old team, after all, one could argue he was the one who tried the hardest to pull them all together after the unfortunate series of events that transpired in their childhood. Some would say that was an understatement, but Naruto liked to look at the lighter side of things. But there truly were some tragic things being glossed over, like the stabbing each other through the chest, attempted murder on everyone on the team, that time where Sasuke joined in the Akatsuki, which was an international terrorist organization made of S-rank shinobi, bent on world domination and mass genocide, and very short period where he wanted to kill all the current Kages, and some other stuff he likely forgot in the years after the 4th Shinobi War and the subsequent workload. You know, normal everyday teen stuff. Okay, that's enough reminiscing, I'm not that old yet. Sakura, please, we have been over before. We cannot afford to do what you are asking for. But. No, buts. When Momoshiki Sasuke first arrived he immediately ambushed and almost managed to successfully capture Jiki. It did not take them even a day before they attacked us during the Chunin exams. If I did not do what I did then and the many times after that, we would be looking at a crater similar to what happened after Pain did, except the hole would be a lot deeper. We cannot afford the instability that would come from me going into hiding or stepping down, and we need Sasuke out there looking for signs of adult Sasuke, rather than looking for a cure to this chakra virus. Sakura looked visibly put out, the wind in her sail being dashed away, knowing Naruto to be the stubbornest individual she had ever met. Not wanting this to escalate into the fight, and judging from the way Sakura was frowning and the growing sense of ire directed at the dear Nanadame, that was exactly where this was going, Kakashi decided now was the time to defuse the situation. After all, no one wanted to have a repeat of what happened the first time Sakura and Naruto fought over this, and unlike back then this time they didn't have the benefit of being in a training ground. Now Naruto, Sakura here is just looking out for what's best for you. We don't know enough about this virus to be able to say what sort of effect it will have on you short or long term, the best we have is it slowly killing you, and the Sage of Six Paths himself had it. Kakashi mollified. As the head of the hospital and medical division, Sakura is the resident expert when it comes to these sorts of things. I know, I get it. Naruto said, but we all know right now the most pressing issue we face is the threat that Sasuke posed to us now. Too much has been sacrificed, and everyone has worked too hard for it to be ruined, now that we have actual peace. Sakura looked ready to argue, but Naruto carried on anyways, look, I am not saying we do nothing. But the advances in sciences and medicine we have made during this peace and the lack of wars, you are more than welcome to devote resources to looking into a cure. I know you, sensei, have already assigned yourself a S-rank mission to do just that. And I smile being the only response he got, earning Kakashi a short chuckle in amusement. As Sakura and Kakashi filed away, each having plenty of responsibilities to get back to within the village, Naruto turned in his chair to look out the windows and gaze upon his home, his village. It really is a beautiful day. Looking out as sunlight bathed the brightly colored rooftops of the various buildings, reflecting off the white paint and shining as bright as the whitest of pearls. The puffy white clouds like splashes in the otherwise perfectly blue sky dotted about, no doubt attracting the attention of many from the infamously lazy but equally as intelligent Nara clan, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace and pride. His sharp eyesight was able to see the academy kids, second years if he wasn't mistaken, running around outside during their lunch break, the studious few choosing instead to practice their kunai and shuriken jutsu on the training dummies, but most playing the ever so popular ninja game. I wonder if Himawari will decide to become a shinobi. That and many similar thoughts flicked through this mind as he let it wander as it was wont to do when he wasn't buried in paperwork, enjoying the small moments of peace before he had to face that dreaded enemy once again. A wistful sigh escaped his lips, basking in the warmth that filtered through the windows before he spun around to face his latest guest. "When did you get back?" "Not too long. I thought I would pay a visit to Sarada before seeing you." The heartfelt smile worked its way onto his face at the news. "Good, you hardly see her, definitely nowhere near as much as you should." As if you want to talk dope. What had once been an insulting nickname had over the years turned into a title of endearment. "I saw Sakura and Kakashi were here a minute ago." Oog, rubbing his face with both his hands, "Not you two team. I keep telling you guys, we will definitely deal with it after the Utsuki are handled but no sooner." "HN, so you say. Speaking of, there's signs some of them are stirring, possibly another group as well. Traces of chakra tearing space-time apart to travel discreetly." Sasuke said, quietly, despite the multitude of security and privacy seals in place, of which Naruto had a fair hand in updating and improving, having spent many years studying seals to live up to the infamous reputation of his mother's clan. The nature of the conversation naturally brought on a more secretive approach. The gravity of the statement starkly contrasted with the idyllic scenery outside the Hokage's office. "I'll keep looking around in the other dimensions, see if I can find out what their goal is or the identity of their members, maybe even their leader if I'm lucky, but it's not exactly easy with the sheer number of multiverses. Plus, I can't go as quickly if I'm still covering my tracks. But they'll probably hold off for a while now since we've taken out the vanguard, should give us a couple months, maybe half a year before they try anything again." "Thank you, Sasuke. Since you are here anyways, you should spend more time with your family, couple days won't make too much of a difference, what with you always being on long extended missions. I know for a fact Sarada has been training hard on her shuriken jutsu, so you will teach her something new." "HN." A faint smile was visible on the otherwise passive face of the elder Uchiha, his dark eyes holding nothing but warmth for his only child as he turned and made his way towards the door. Just as he was about to pass the doorframe, he turns to look at his longtime rival and best friend. "Same to you, dope, no point working so hard for peace if you don't spend that time with your family." And with his piece said, he left, the sound of the door closing being the only indication he left. "Yeah," Naruto muttered, "gotta make the most of the time I've got left." Even as he said that his hand started trembling and he clamped down on it with his other hand. He could feel it, the chakra that made him the strongest Hokage in Konoha's history and one of the two most powerful shinobi to ever live alongside his best friend, he could feel the disturbance. A slight sickly feeling that gradually evolved and became more painful the longer he used his vast pool of chakra in the defense of his home and family, for the people he was responsible for protecting, for carrying the will of fire onto the next generation and the true king. One last obstacle, one last enemy, then Konohamaru will be ready to take the hat. But until then Naruto looked up at the 7 portraits of all the previous Hokages before him, eyes automatically focusing on the pictures of a wizened Sandaime, before sliding right to the portrait of his father. "I won't let them destroy the home both of you and so many others gave their lives protecting. Besides, where else will I get my ramen from without Ichiraku's?" Cracking a grin, his elongated incisors poking out slightly and chuckling to himself, he got back to work tackling the mountains of paperwork he had to contend with on a daily basis. Unknown dimension, 2 years later. Sasuke was a patient man, but many who knew him in his earlier years would have contested that statement heavily. But with age comes wisdom, and Sasuke was much older and infinitely more knowledgeable than he had been in his youth. No longer charging in headfirst, blindly following whatever people told him with unquestioning faith and always critiquing everything around him to understand it before making judgments. No more rash conclusions that were regretted later. He paid the price tenfold for folly and blind anger, the sins of his younger self, never truly leaving him as he was constantly reminded by the power of his eyes. The fact he didn't have a left arm below the elbow also kind of stuck out. But right now, as he walked around in this newest dimension, he had to wonder if there really was sense to the universe or if it was just the biggest pot in known existence with the worst cook imaginable who tossed everything in and stirred. His latest dimension hop and search for the Utsuki or perhaps this elusive Kara group that started acting up was certainly quite odd. His legendary jutsus allowed him one of the greatest if not the best visual acuity known to all shinobi kind. He would vehemently dismiss anyone who said the Byakugan could possibly match the eyes of his clan. He stood in a little patch of forestry, surrounded by many high buildings, much higher than was ever found in any hidden village. Although, Naruto did mention this one time where he was chasing this puppeteer and they time traveled to the city of Rimran back in its prime. The similarities between those buildings and these ones is evident. The drifting of his thoughts to a particular topic made his mood sour faster than the Horatian Naruto was now so fond of. The reason he was here was far and away not what he should have been doing. what the dope doesn't know won't hurt him. Being the only one with the eyes of the sage, it's not like Naruto would ever know Sasuke wasn't looking for Sasuke or the Kara organization right then and there, but rather a cure, potential or otherwise, for the chakra virus. After a couple years of the virus progressing in his longtime rival, it was starting to become evident Naruto wasn't able to fully utilize his chakra and fight like he should have been able to, and despite his reassurances it was minor, nothing escaped these eyes, these cursed eyes that saw all. Like so many times before, Sasuke immediately cast a quick ninjutsu on the nearest person, who just so happened to be a lanky-looking man in a rather odd outfit. Why would someone wear a cloth around their neck like a noose? So many ways for an enemy to disable or kill him. Despite his grievances with the attire, he did have to admit it created a sense of importance and formality around him. Jinjutsu complete, he instantly learned the native language and the knowledge the man before him had. Now knowing he was in a place called New York, irrelevant details like the date 1/7/2020, the time 1335, wife's birthday and meeting schedules filtered through his head, only committing the important facts like laws and notable locations to his memory. Forming a hand seal, he flawlessly created 7 shadow clones to travel to the largest landmasses and start their reconnaissance mission, all disappearing in his signature teleportation thanks to his unique Sharingan. Perhaps he would be able to find something here which could help his best friend. Having traveled to many dimensions at this point and his extensive shinobi training, he knew exactly how to blend in, soon vanishing and starting his tireless search. Unknown dimension, 10 days later. Sasuke wasn't sure what to think of this new place, whether this would be as useless as all the other dimensions he went to, or if this would be the pain of existence, he could find some clue as to how to cure his best friend. After the first 5 minutes he already knew no one in this world had chakra, but almost as instantaneously as that he also knew there was a plethora of strange powers present. Several groups made of powerful individuals inhabited this world in certain locations that he later learned were the people's ancient deities. Much like their own world except if the Shinigami decided to set up camp somewhere specific, I don't want to imagine something like that. Knowing the sort of power-hungry people back at the elemental nations, there's no telling how many people might try something like people did with the Biju to get stronger. It took him a while, not for a lack of trying or skill, to find an individual with said powers. It seemed the beings themselves didn't tend to stay in one place. What's more, they could emulate the shadow clone jutsu in their own way, but having analyzed it some more with his ninjutsus, he found something rather interesting. They quite literally split themselves into multiple parts, reminding him far too much of White Zetsu for his comfort. Another thing that made it somewhat harder to track down the original deities was the numerous children each one seemed to have had. Granted, Sasuke could understand wanting to have a large family, but the sheer number all at roughly the same age was a bit of a foreign concept to wrap his head around, bearing too many similarities to what the hidden villages used to do to those with Kekkei Genkai for his personal preference. Especially since they all had the same mother or father, at least with the clans it was just one very large extended family. But setting that aside, he was looking for a specific being in particular. He learned one of these beings, Athena, was sworn to never share a bed with a man, and yet Sasuke came across several other beings who shared physical traits with each other and to her. On its own it was nothing surprising, after all, DNA can only do so much in terms of hair and eye color, but more importantly, he could see with his eyes, they were not like the other humans. They had the same energy, the same power, although to a much lesser extent, within them as her that the rest of the people which made up the majority of the world's population lacked. They didn't look it, but they were special, and quite possibly something that he would be able to use to save Naruto. Sure, he saw plenty of other half-human half-deity people running around, some being chased by monsters and a lot of them in one camp or another, but Athena's children were special. From what he'd gathered, the deity known as Athena, most likely after taking fancy of a man, would use her powers to create a child. Now, if he could learn the exact mechanisms of how she took her pure energy to create a mortal living being of flesh and blood, he may be able to replicate that to create a new body for Naruto. As things stood now with their own research into chakra, it had insofar proven to be impossible and loath as he was to admit it, Orochimaru was probably the most qualified person to declare it as such. What with his extensive years of research and his quest for immortality leading him down many dark roads which would have and did drive many people insane. Once the physical form was created, the transfer of souls would be done easily enough. Sasuke shuddered at the memories that brought him. He may not have shown how disgusted he was when he killed Orochimaru and that vile jutsu was used, but he still had memories. Unfortunately, the eidetic memory of the Sharingan worked against him this time. It's nothing like Orochimaru's firm Fushi no Jutsu, the body we would create wouldn't have a soul, so theoretically Naruto would be reborn in an entirely empty healthy vessel. If that doesn't outright cure him, at the very least it would buy us time to either find a permanent cure or we could keep creating new bodies when the previous one gets inevitably damaged from the infected chakra. Looking at the end product was all well and good, but it didn't give much more information about the mechanics of how they were created, all it did was prove it was possible. So he had to wait for step 1, he had to actually witness the creation of one such child firsthand. Not as easy as it sounded, even for a shinobi of his caliber as it turned out. Oh, there was an easy way to do it, involving breaking into their fortress in the clouds atop the large building in the center of the city he first arrived in called the Empire States Building, where the deities lived, if the high concentration of essence staying there long-term indicated anything. A rather pretentious name if you ask him, but he wasn't going to comment much. Not out loud at the very least. But he couldn't simply teleport or sneak up there lest he take the small but still present risk of discovery, and the last thing he wanted was to start a fight with the very beings he was trying to spy on covertly. So, he was stuck with the hard way, relying on his eyes and senses to find a larger than average concentration out in the world of one specific deity's power, and waiting to see if and when it would create a child. It had already been a while since he'd first arrived on this world, and he was currently in the state called San Francisco, closely keeping watch on the nearest concentration of power. It had already been a couple days since the deity took an interest in this particular human, and it seemed as if things were going to be much like before, where the deity would part ways and nothing would come of it. Then something peculiar happened. He saw the essence extend from the deity's mind and come into contact with the human's head, although he showed no visible reaction, for the briefest of moments before receding back into itself, and they bid each other farewell. The humans of this world are woefully inadequate. He thought, how could they be so blind and senseless to the goings and powers of the world around them? Completely baffled him. The half-human half-deity people him and his clones had come across weren't much better in his opinion, but at least they could see the monsters and weird elf things in nature running around. The less time spent dwelling on the weird half-man half-sheep thing he saw running after a young elf child thing in the forest, with an expression eerily similar to what Kakashi would look like when reading his ridiculous book, the better. But that single exchange, that small moment of action was all Sasuke needed to see everything in perfect detail and more. His eternal Mangekyou Sharingan and Sharingan allowed him to analyze what just happened perfectly. The eidetic memory of things seen by the infamous copy wheel allowed him to re-watch the event like a film in his mind, and he had the remote control, like that new TV Sarada liked to watch oh so much. Interesting. Sasuke instantly dispelled the shadow clones that were active before tailing the deity. As the days passed by, doing nothing else, he studied and theorized. He watched the formation of a human baby from the thoughts of both the male human and deity. He didn't pay much more attention after the female baby was created and later taken away by another deity with a very strong Fuetan affinity, before activating his Sharingan to get back to the others as quickly as possible. Between Sakura's expertise in medicine and biology, Naruto's knowledge in seals, and my own experience with jutsus, we might be able to use this to help Naruto. As he was pulled out from this dimension, thoughts on how to imitate such an act were already flitting through this mind. Either being discarded as unreasonable or saved for their potential. But this isn't the end. His eyes narrowed slightly. It would be foolish and arrogant to just assume this one thing would be enough to save him. The metaphor, or maybe it was an idiom, this world has is quite apt: don't put all your eggs in one basket. Just as he was leaving, however, he saw someone in the crowd who caught his eye. It was only a fraction of a second before he left this dimension, and the crowd split open just at the right time, but that was all he needed. At a cursory glance, it was no one special, just a 9 maybe 10 years old boy with long auburn-colored hair, pale skin that seemed to glow slightly under the moon, giving him a rather ethereal angelic look, only emphasized by the silvery wide eyes that looked like someone miniaturized the moon itself. Look similar to the Byakugan. But the most shocking things was the face, or more specifically, the faint lines that looked tattooed on the cheeks like the whiskers of an animal. The child simply looked at him. Even as he teleported back home, he had an odd feeling, a strange connection to the child stood before him. His eyes told him the child, much like the other half-human half-deity people he'd seen running round, had the same minute amount of energy from their godly parent, but something in his gut told him otherwise. The child didn't appear shocked by the otherworldly ability that Sasuke possessed, but seemed to be deep in thought, almost like he was trying to remember or figure something out, if the slight frown that marred his forehead. The last thing Sasuke saw before he slipped away was the slight tilt of the child's head, before all he saw was the vast emptiness of the space between dimensions, not noticing the elongated incisors revealed by the grin. On Hagakure, 5 years later. Deep within the Hokage's tower, there lay many secrets. Secure rooms where various meetings took place, like the monthly meeting of clan heads, who would gather alongside the Hokage's advisors and Anbu commander to discuss important topics relating to the safety and stability of Konoha. Located alongside this incredibly secured building were file rooms with mission report dating back as far as the Shodaime Hashirama Senju, which held many skeletons, loath as anyone was to admit. Normally the Hokage's residents were also here to be occupied by the current Hokage, but much like his father, Naruto elected to live in his own house out in the village proper. Currently, one room in particular was occupied and for reasons that would have implications, which would surely send shockwaves across the elemental nations. The sterile white room was filled wall to wall with the most sophisticated medical machinery, allowing for the most detailed analysis of the person laying on the single bed in the center. Muted but clear white lights hung overhead. The lack of natural lighting, a byproduct of several meters of layered densely packed earth reinforced by seals, made for an impressive bunker that nothing short of a pajama would struggle to blow open. For the secretness of the bunker and clandestine nature of rooms under the Hokage's tower, the number of people present would normally contradict such notions, but given the circumstances normal protocol was somewhat disregarded. Kurama watched from within the 8-trigram seal, once a dreaded genjutsu that called upon the power of the Shinigami itself to forcefully contain his chakra in the day-old Naruto now acted as a way for Kurama to continue to stay with Naruto, long past the time when he could have left and roamed free as he once did. Like how his life had been for thousands of years after the sage passed, before the hated Madara Uchiha used his cursed eyes to involve him in his feud with Hashirama Senju. Kurama growled, the sound a deep rumbling like 100 Doton jutsus all at once that could drive hundreds of shinobi to flee and carry the power to rain death and destruction. He hated this. He was the most powerful Biju of the 9 created, his 9 orange-red tails denoting his power swaying and twitching in annoyance behind him, creating a mesmerizing imitation of a living flame as he struggled to think of something which could help his partner. It had been tough for his partner these past years. With the sheer number of high-level fights Naruto took part in his role as 7th Hokage, accelerating the rate at which the chakra virus progressed through his body, it was due to strength and his Uzumaki heritage, which allowed him to live for so long. That, and Naruto's stubborn streak was a mile wide at its narrowest point. Kurama chuckled to himself, memories of the many barbs and jabs they took at each other filled his mind. But at long last old Sasuke and Kara organization were finished, Boruto and Kawaki having both been targeted for individual reasons, had grown rapidly into fine shinobi, powerful in their own right. Naruto had confided to him multiple times how he worried for their growth and safety, seeming to lack the drive to improve themselves and unaware of the true dangers that had lurked out there, but over time, as they grew up and events transpired, they had risen to the challenge. Even if their rise in strength was meteoric and rivaled the old Team 7's power, Naruto still had to fight due to his vast experience in the field of combat, fighting as easily as he lived and breathed. All that fighting had its costs though, the diversion of resources to defense and combat had drawn them away from researching on a cure, and the fighting itself seemed to accelerate the progression, though the lack of research meant no one knew why. That's not even considering the costs to Naruto's own deteriorating health. As the fighting went on and preparations for future engagements took place, Kurama had time, not as much as he would have liked, but time nonetheless. Only having to become actively involved when Naruto himself was in a fight or when they were discussing strategy. Conversations never took more than a cursory thought, with entire conversations going by while both did their own thing. In that time Kurama worked, more specifically, he was designing a space-time seal. One did not become as old as he without learning almost all there is to learn and being sealed within 2 powerful Uzumakis before Naruto, who were seen as some of the greatest genjutsu users ever, even within the infamous Uzumaki clan once renowned for their genjutsu expertise, did mean he learned a lot as unwillingly as he would admit such a thing. It was this experimental seal, this last gamble, which was being weighed within him, the risks were great, but so were the benefits. Kurama started designing it some years ago, after the not-so-bad Uchiha reported seeing something extraordinary on the interdimensional travels. The creation of a flesh and blood human from nothing more than thoughts from another, and the powers of this being, and so the work began. Initial attempts to use biology and have chakra mimic the process seen soon proved to be futile. The differences in what chakra was, an equal mixture of spiritual and physical energy created by the soul and body itself, prevented it from being used to create a body. The law of conservation of energy wouldn't allow for the product to be used to create the origin that would then be able to produce the product again just wouldn't work. Using Naruto's vast chakra reserves to create an artificial pool of chakra that would be used to power a storage seal containing the shadow clone jutsu also failed because there was no way to stop the halving of chakra used and the memories developed by the clone never quite seemed to translate back to the sealed chakra pool from which it came from. No perpetual motion system had been successfully developed and it seemed these experiments reinforced that. And that led Kurama to the seal that stood before him now, as if taunting him in his ineptitude to save his partner. Oh, he had attempted many things, burning the infected chakra out with his own, expelling large quantities before replenishing it repeatedly to dilute the infestation, even temporarily draining all chakra before he started his entire chakra network, the list was endless. All he had to show for it was this, as he looked down in front of him the tiny flicker of a blue flame. Compared to his massive form even laid down, arms crossed in front of him with his head rested atop, it was tiny, far too small. Nowhere near enough to sustain Naruto's body, it being used to having vast quantities of chakra flowing like a rapid through the pathways. This tiny speck from such a vast origin truly was a spoon attempting to empty a lake, but it was all that he could manage. Years of trial and error, and this was the best he could manage to isolate from the dreaded chakra virus, with all his knowledge and power. This tiny bit of chakra that wasn't infected. This one hope that Naruto would be able to somehow live. Well, this and the other option. The other Biju had already said their goodbyes and departed, each leaving a minute part of themselves, smaller than what even Kurama managed to isolate, so that Naruto would know they would never forget him, staying with him in his final moments. But Kurama stayed, he had already said everything he wanted to say to his partner, to the one human after Hagoromo that he respected. He would die with Naruto, sure, he would reform after several years, and he was sure it wouldn't be the most pleasant of experiences, but if he could spend even a second longer with Naruto, then it was worth it. He could hear through Naruto's senses, hear the final goodbyes of everyone out there saying everything they wanted to say. This day had been coming for a while now, most of the more foreign dignitaries whom Naruto had a profound impact on like that ice princess or the shrine maiden had come and gone, having said their wishes. Now it was just for those Naruto was closest to. From Gaara's solemn expression and gratitude to having met Naruto way back in the Genin exams and changing him for the better to Tsunade's murmured apologies for not being able to do more. Sakura promising to look after Hinata, Kakashi clasping Naruto's shoulder and squeezing tight before backing away and the meaningful look Sasuke gave him before fist bumping. Hinata somehow managed to not break down, though it didn't stem the tide that was spilling down her cheeks all the same as she bid him farewell. Himawari was inconsolable, crying and refusing to let go of her father's hand, much older now having grown into a fine kunoichi. Naruto and Kawaki were trying to calm Himawari down, but they themselves were in no better shape on the inside. I think by the Shinigami that voice sounded so weak, Kurama hated it. He never knew he could hate anything more than Madara Uchiha, but at that moment he hated with more zeal than he thought he had. This is it guys. Naruto grinned all the same as if it was just another day. The others probably didn't know just how much pain Naruto was in right now, but Kurama knew, ever since Naruto was born, he knew what Naruto was feeling to an extent. That only strengthened after Naruto had opened the gates of the seal and they fully trusted each other, thoughts, feelings and ideas passing back and forth between them seamlessly. Kurama knew it was like liquid fire was running through Naruto's chakra pathways, stabbing pains like a million senbon tipped with poison. Painkillers could only do so much when the body turned on itself. Don't you all join me too soon. I want to hear all the stories and missions you get up to. Even while Naruto talked, Kurama lay there and thought. This would actually be it. They had run out of options. That pink-haired one and her teacher couldn't cure the disease, the searches of their sensei and the Uchiha had found nothing useful or reproducible with chakra. But Kurama was ancient, he had his idea, he had his gamble. The seal before him was nowhere near complete, there was a very high likelihood it would simply fail to activate or would do something unexpected. But as he watched his partner leave the realm of man to join the Shinigami, he rolled the dice. Surely some of that idiot's luck had to have rubbed off on him. Guiding that tiny flicker of chakra to the center of the seal array, he wove through the hand signs. Even as the integrity of the 8 trigram seal started to dissipate, having lost the very thing it was anchored to, he continued. On the last hand sign, he touched the seal and pumped a truly massive amount of chakra into the array. It would need the energy to travel across the dimensions, tearing holes in space-time many times over as it traversed to get to where it needed to link to and here, in theory anyways. He never knew whether or not his gamble had paid off or he faded away, leaving the vast cavern of the seal empty for the first time in decades, the gargantuan size emphasized by its emptiness. All except on the floor, the seal array glowed a deep blood red before changing color to that of the purest silver, the chakra at its center flickered like a candle in the wind, buffeted by a huge storm. 1 second it was there, the next, it wasn't. Amazon rainforest, unknown time. A young woman stood in the depths of the forest, surrounded on all sides by the sounds of nature. She was a maiden hunter, sworn to never take a man as her own. Many would have described her as beautiful, with her long auburn-colored hair and pale skin that shone in the soft glow of the moonlight. As bright as the moon was, few beams of light penetrated the thick overgrowth. With an elegant antler-shaped bow, her hunting knives strapped to her thighs and a quiver full of silver arrows on her back, she cut a dangerous opponent and a deadly predator. Her silver camouflage clothes, whilst contrasting with the lustrous green of the foliage around her, made her like a shadow amongst the night. As she stalked her prey, her thoughts drifted as thought were bound to do, given the millennia she had existed. She knew exactly what was going on around her, her senses being far sharper than was possible to understand by most. Yet she was surprised by what happened next. Because as she padded through the forest floor, a bright light engulfed the clearing she found herself in. Though the light was blinding, she was unaffected as she herself was the cause of such godly light. Such was the case when her true form was revealed. As the light faded, it became apparent she was no longer on her own. For the next thing she knew, she was holding a baby. She was dumbfounded, not a feeling a being of her stature was used to. When the baby eventually opened his eyes, and she knew instinctively that the baby was a male, silver eyes like the moon, almost as if she were looking in a mirror, stared back at her. Chapter 2. Amazon Rainforest. The sound of water smashing itself against the rocks below filled the otherwise quiet clearing. A jaguar crouched by the water's edge, eyes scanning the surface for any disturbances, ears swiveling back and forth as it stayed alert, unwilling to become something else's dinner. Its midnight black coat, perfect for blending in amongst the dense foliage of the rainforest it called home, shone with the healthy sheen of an animal in its prime. Unbeknownst to the apex predator, another hunter was watching it. Standing at the crest of the waterfall, the hunter had a perfect view. If they so wished, they could have released an arrow and slay the jaguar with it, none the wiser where its death fell from. But they didn't, instead taking in the scene that would have made artists green with envy. The hunter had another target tonight, and it was a far greater prize than any jaguar or mortal creature could be, though the memories associated with the beast drew a frown across her brow. But that was long ago. Now it was just another hunt, and soon another trophy to be displayed alongside an ever-growing collection of wild beasts. The jaguar perked up suddenly, its instincts flaring as it sensed it was being watched. But when its eyes roamed around looking for the disturbance and found the top of the cliff face, the absence of any signs of life made it flick its tail in dismissal. Stalking off into the forest, melting into the shadows cast by the full moon. Meanwhile, with the hunter, she had already moved on. Having found tracks left behind by her quarry, she was off once again. Her silver tunic and sandals that would otherwise have been seemingly ill-suited for a hunter to wear out in the wild were her preferred clothes and seemed to blend into the shadows. Only reappearing in flashes when a stray beam of moonlight fought its way through the tree's cover as she ran. Despite the speed at which she traveled, nary a sound could be heard. Twigs and dried leaves which would have given her away were unbroken, and no evidence of her passing remained. As she ran, auburn hair loose and whipping in the air, her sharp eyes scanned the blurring trees as she sped past. Constantly staying on the trail of her prey, the ever so slight indentations indicating its passing. The shallowness of the tracks left behind belied the creature's true size and weight, barely distinguishable to the untrained eye from the multitude of other tracks that littered the forest floor. Soon she arrived at an otherwise innocuous-looking clearing before the ground started to rise into a mountain, like an ugly claw that broke out of the ground to scar the heavens. She stayed at the tree line, unwilling to expose herself in the open clearing. She climbed up a nearby tree, a heavier brasiliensis she absent-mindedly noted. Its smooth trunk would have otherwise proved a challenge to most, but for someone of her caliber and agility, it might as well have been a walk in the park. The mortals have taken an interest in this species as of late. Maybe I should create more predatorial animals before I leave to discourage their harmful forays. I'm sure Pan would approve. Sadly, she couldn't do much more than that. It didn't sit well with her or any in her family to outright kill the mortals they ruled over, even if they are asking for it. She thought. Hating how the humans were destroying the natural wonders to feed their ever-growing lust for more. Her straying thoughts did little to distract her from the hunt. Now that she was higher up, she scrutinized the sight before her. With her inhumanely acute hearing, she could tell the burrow in the side of the mountain went very deep, extending into a complex cave system. The size of the opening was rather small given what it housed, its shadowed opening like a gaping maw, consuming those who entered. As she took stock of her equipment, she formulated a plan, the final part of what would be a rewarding hunt, for she needed to finish soon. It was about time she had to return to her hunters. With the moon overhead, as if watching like an eternal warden, she started. Dropping down to the ground below, she landed in a crouch, with her bow drawn and arrow notched. She let it loose. The silver streak shot out at breakneck speed before finding its mark. An ear-splitting screech resonated through the cave, shattering the silence of the forest, scattering birds into the night and causing animals nearby to flee in terror. A strange hissing clicking sound gradually got louder before a huge scorpion emerged from the burrow. Its huge head swung back and forth across the tree line, pincers the size of boulders held out and open, just waiting to stab and eviscerate the one who heard it with bloody vengeance. A silver arrow embedded within one of its black empty eyes, but unlike all other creatures, this one bled golden powder as it leaked from the open wound like a morbid tribute to the value of one's lifeblood. Another arrow soon found itself within a different eye, restricting its field of vision even more, angering it further with the injury. The massive scorpion was smart though, knowledge accrued as ages passed and years heaped upon years, existing for more than a millennium as it hunted and killed. felling many of those who tried to slay it, to claim the credit for finally killing the great scorpion, the Scorpios that slew the great hunter giant Orion. It raised its pincers, protecting its head as it advanced, all 8 legs moving in tandem, blitzing forward from where it deduced the arrow came from far faster than a monster of its size and weight had any right to. Before it reached its target it suddenly opened its arms, emitting a horrible screeching sound that could paralyze, encircling the one who heard it as its tail shot forward faster than any human could hope to react. Normally this was where the hunt would end, the hunter would get caught, either on the end of the stinger filled with deadly poison or torn to shreds by the pincers flanking them. But this was no ordinary hunter, just as it looked like the stinger would find its mark, the hunter backflipped out of the way. The stinger, huge and deadly weapon it may be, flexible it was not as its size and weight made it unwieldy, unable to change directions after being propelled forwards at such speeds. Inertia ensured it buried itself into the ground, and that's when it happened. The snare she set up after dropping down from the tree sprung, gravity dragging the counterweight to the ground, snaring the deadly appendage in between the armor plates, it caught and pulled the limb up. The scorpion hissed in confusion, its deadliest weapon now useless, pulled up, and with its rear end raised, most of its legs were lifted off the ground, tilting it forward and forcing its head to be pressed against the ground, fangs filled with dirt and arms spread out sideways. The thick protective carapace that normally ensured its protection worked against it as their inflexibility came into play. Before it could regain its bearings and fight its way out of the simple trap, the hunter burst forward. Hunting knife reflecting the light of the moon as it arched down. She struck true. The knife sliding through the cracks between the thick carapace like a hot knife through butter, the scorpion gave one last hiss before dissolving into a mound of golden powder, its soul scattered to Tartarus, where it would remain until it inevitably coalesced and regenerated. This happened with all monsters, though the more powerful the monster, the longer it would take to reform. That was why she and her hunters were so busy. As Artemis, goddess of the hunt amongst other things, it fell under her domain to keep monsters such as these from running amok. She walked forward, amidst the golden powder before retrieving her prize, the pincers of the monster had shrunk, forming what looked like 2 identical shields with a pincer atop like a frill, their serrated edge gleaming dangerously. Memories flooded her mind as she inspected them, this was the very same creature who killed Orion, it wasn't surprising they held special meaning to her. She remembered it as clear as the moon and stars were tonight, despite being blinded and having Hephaestus craft him a new set of eyes, he was a great hunter. That was how they met, Artemis was a master of the bow, and soon they formed a close friendship, even inviting him to become the first male to join her hunters because of the trust fostered between them. But all was ruined when Orion fell in love and tried to woo her, a clear violation of their vows, and nothing but rejection awaited him. For she was a maiden goddess, sworn to stay a virgin for life. Everything spiraled downward from there, going on longer and more isolated hunts from anyone else and become crueler, slowly killing his prey instead of giving them a quick death. The stench of madness lingered on him, growing thicker as time passed. One day Artemis decided to follow him, and that is when it happened, he snapped, whether his anger consumed him or some madness possessed him. He started killing all the animals he could see, small and large, dangerous and harmless. So much so that Gaia herself took notice of the massacre, the primordial goddess of the earth existed in a perpetual state of sleep, too large to ever become fully conscious lest the world end. She sent a creature, the very scorpion Artemis had just slain, to kill Orion, to stop him from massacring her creations. Artemis could have warned him, she saw the scorpion emerging from the ground, could have killed it herself if she fancied, but she held her silence and stayed her hands. As Orion lay there dying from the poison the scorpion's lethal stinger injected into his body, he saw her standing in the tree line, even struggling to breath and his organs shutting down one at a time. He cursed her name and swore revenge with his final breath. He certainly believed she had sent the scorpion to kill him in spite, as mistaken as he was. Such a tragedy the way things turned out. She thought to herself. One would think Artemis would never get close to any male ever again, let alone allowing one to join the hunt. But Artemis was just, she didn't paint all males with as broad a brush as that, for later on she would let another join her hunt. A prince by the name of Hippolytus, who had taken the oath as all hunters had to. For many years his things were perfect, he never strayed, he never tried anything as Orion did, but all good things had to come to an end. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, saw to that. She had a grudge against the hunters of Artemis for they swore off her primary domain, there wasn't much she could do to Artemis, so she took it out on them as she had done so many times before. Making Hippolytus's stepmother fall in love with him, and when he inevitably rejected her, she went to his father to lie about him forcing himself on her. Outraged, his father had him executed. When Artemis learned of this, she was livid. One of the few men who walked the earth who she and her hunters called a friend and one of her hunters dying for such a petty reason wouldn't be allowed to end like this. After getting her brother's son, Asclepius, to bring Hippolytus back to life, she erased his memories of the hunt and settled him down in a land far away from Greece and therefore away from Aphrodite. She then dragged Aphrodite before her father Zeus, told him the entire story and the many times before of Aphrodite's meddlings with her hunters. Zeus, always having a bit of a soft spot for his daughters, granted a request and ordered Aphrodite to never interfere with any of the hunters of Artemis indirectly or directly. Despite matters of love being within her domain and such a decree would normally be seen as an egregious abuse of power, the fact that the hunters were gifted by Zeus to Artemis over an oath sworn on the river Styx, and them being the handmaidens and personal entourage of Artemis and therefore part of her domain, meant Zeus ruled in Artemis's favor. Why are so many males so awful? If they were raised and taught proper morals and principles, there would be so fewer problems with the world. For she had seen the ugly side to humanity, all too often worn by the men she encountered on her travels. Her hunters would save young girls from vile men who treated them badly and abused them, many would even join them or be taken to some other safe place. This led to her hunters having a decidedly negative opinion of the opposite gender. They weren't outright hostile, but there was a distinctly negative atmosphere and degree of withdrawal and mistrust whenever a male showed up or was in the immediate vicinity. Not like Artemis was any better, she was the reason the northern continent had so many jackalopes running around after all, males were not allowed to witness her hunts. In her defense, it was incredibly entertaining turning awful men into one four-legged creature or another and watching as they ran around in a panic before the threat of a hunt made them flee to never be seen again. Raising a child, now that would be interesting. The idea wasn't as ridiculous as one would think. She was a maiden goddess true, but so was her sister Athena, the goddess of knowledge, who had quite a few children. Odysseus, Euclid, Newton, and most recently William Shakespeare to name a few. Artemis never really paid too much attention to the entire explanation of how it worked when Athena was asked during that summer council, for it had caused quite a stir with her first child. Many had questioned her maidenhood, but one didn't easily win an argument against a goddess whose domain was knowledge itself. Something along the lines of using thoughts and ideas from a mortal man and some other more technical things, she really wasn't listening. Being a young goddess at the time, she was more concerned about leaving the throne room to go on her next hunt, chasing the next wild beast that was unlucky enough to have caught her eye. I wonder she let her mind drift, imagining what a child of her own would look like. Would they be a boy or a girl? After much deliberation she decided on a boy. As tempted by the thought of a daughter as she was, and whilst she may not have appreciated the gender itself, nor the vast majority of people who were a part of it, she would want her child to be able to stand as an exemplar. The way to show men that their gender didn't justify their vileness, but rather it was their choice, and through that realization, to hopefully inspire change to better themselves in his image. Or maybe it was to Robin that any child she had, boy or girl, would be better in all manners measurable than any of her family's children. What would he look like? All of Athena's children share the traits of blonde hair and grey eyes favored by her. Lord Zeus's children all have blue eyes, and Apollo's kids were all blonde. As a goddess she could change her appearances however she fancied at the drop of a hat, but her current form was her most frequent coloration, long auburn hair, and pale skin with a healthy glow. The one thing she did keep constant was her eyes, they were a silvery yellow like the moon itself and seemed to shine in the night. Does Athena also choose their behavior traits, preferences and mentality? They all seem to share the heightened intelligence surely inherited from her, but how much is personality influenced by environment and upbringing, rather than genetics and lineage, if something like intelligence can be imposed? If she's influencing things to do with the mind, surely that affects how the child thinks. How can she guarantee one child will be different from another after her tampering, despite the inherent randomness that would come form the union of her thoughts with that of the mortal man she chose? Thoughts on having children of her own came and went every now and then over the centuries, ever since Athena had her first child. This time felt different though, having recently witnessed a truly horrific scene of men taking advantage of the many women out in the cane fields in abundance to the south of the northern continent. It sickened her. The satisfaction in spiriting the women and girls away to the Amazons on their secluded island and accidentally leaving the armory open for the male slaves was immense. The screams that followed were the tunes of sweet retribution to her ears. Her eyes closed in thought, brow slightly furrowed as she thought long and hard about her theoretical child. For some reason she was investing a lot of in-depth thought into this, much more than usual. Maybe this hunt had brought up a more contemplative mood. So much so that she could vaguely picture him now in her mind's eyes. Some said the fates were all-powerful, even the gods couldn't go against them, and heeded their words whenever a warning was given, a prophecy spoken, or a death foretold. Zeus, the king of the gods himself, had feared their warning and took steps to ensure he would never sire a male child with Metis, to ensure he wouldn't be supplanted much like this father the Titan king Kronos before him. Maybe it was fated that this would happen, maybe it was dumb luck, it hardly mattered in the end. The results were all the same. With Artemis deep in thought about what a child of her own would be like, what was started dimensions away was coming to its conclusion here. At her feet, black ink seemed to sprawl out from under her sandals, the chakra that powered the Genjutsu guided it to take the form it needed, completely invisible to the senses of those unfamiliar with the foreign energy, unless one was physically looking at it. Soon a complex diagram resembling a spider's web was drawn out under her as she unknowingly stood at its center. She did notice however as she shifted into her true form, a bright light engulfed the clearing like a star itself had spontaneously appeared. Artemis could feel some of her godly power being drawn and start to concentrate itself in front of her. Artemis was not afraid though, she could feel no other being nearby, godly or mortal, all the animals fleeing after the fight that had ensued. So intently focused on her own fragment before her, containing none of her consciousness which was decidedly strange, she didn't notice the small blue flame that appeared. Unseen by her, shielded as it was by her own light, the blue flame flickered which to life was seemingly incorporated into the isolated portion of her own essence. She watched with rapt attention as the light seemed to shrink, coalescing itself into a tightly contained sphere before it gently floated towards her. Instinctively she reached out and the glowing sphere cracked open, fading away, to reveal a baby. That is promptly when Artemis's thought processes decided to take a holiday and stop working. Amazon rainforest. To say Artemis was in a state of shock would be a slight understatement. She could hardly comprehend what had just happened, let alone believe it. This can't be happening. But the sight before her very own eyes and the weight of the baby in her arms only seemed to emphasize the truth of the situation she found herself in. The final nail in the coffin. She could feel it, every child of a god or goddess, Olympian or minor, even the nature spirits, contained a small fragment, a tiny portion of power, that was the exact same as that of their godly parent. It was what monsters found themselves attracted to. It was what gave their demigod children their godly gifts. It was also the exact same thing she felt resonating within the small baby she held like glass in her arms, wrapped up in a blanket as he was. At first, she thought she was under some sort of spell by Hecate being one of the old goddesses, and magic was an elusive and mystic art, or maybe some elaborate prank by Hermes or Apollo. Not like this would be the first time, and there were precious few lines they were unwilling to cross. But no. There was no way to perfectly mimic the exact same godly power that she or anyone else had. She continued to stare at the baby, thoughts running a mile a minute as she tried to wrap her head around what just happened. How could this happen? Athena herself said she needed the thoughts of a mortal man to act as an input to create a child. Otherwise it would be her own power creating a living thing containing her own consciousness, and that would just be her cloning herself. Separating a fragment of our essence to perform more than one task simultaneously and to be in multiple places at the same time is something we can all do. How could a living being, entirely separate from me, be created from nothing but my own powers? There's no one here. She looked around, focusing more carefully on her surroundings and indeed finding not a single trace of any mortal or god anywhere near. Even the few nymphs and dryads present had retreated into their origins or were asleep, not wanting to get involved in her hunt and subsequent fight against the giant scorpion. Restless stirring from the small bundle immediately commanded all her focus as she looked down to see if the baby was in any discomfort or pain. The baby wriggled around some more before opening his eyes. She thought she had accepted that she had a child before, but it truly sunk in like a rock sinking until it inevitably reached the bottom. The same silvery yellow eyes, an exact mirror copy of her own, stared up at her. The baby she held in her arms was her child. She was holding her son. And suddenly she was terrified. Of her family, of the monsters that roamed the land and of herself. Her family would be a mixed bag of curious, outraged, uncaring or anything in between. Maybe some accusations and threats would be thrown about, but after some thought, ultimately there was nothing that they could really do against her or her son. Athena was a maiden goddess much like herself, and yet, she had children just as regularly as Ares or Aphrodite. Human intelligence was advancing at a rapid pace, so it really was to no one's surprise. Some questions might be raised about her having a male child, but she did frequently say proper upbringing could solve many of the world's problems. Monsters would be all over him. A child of any of the other gods or nature spirits were a common enough event that monsters only got really excited whenever a child of either Zeus, Poseidon or Hades popped up, and that was because of the sheer power that their children had. Being a child of the big three guaranteed they would attract the deadliest of monsters, but so long as they were trained, they could take on entire packs of monsters and come out victorious. That is, if hubris or some other fatal flaw didn't strike them down. But a child of hers was entirely new, never before in the entire existence of the world had any mortal ever been born of her. Though perhaps the novelty of it would be diminished by the presence of her hunters who all received her blessing. If her son managed to survive long enough to reach his early teenage years and was trained, she was sure he would survive. The only safe place for demigods like him was in Camp Half-Blood, run by the centaur Chiron. Her mouth twisted into a frown at that, the option leaving a bitter taste in her mouth. Normally demigod children were raised by their mortal parents until they reached an appropriate age, roughly 10-12, although some were later but rarely sooner. Around then, they would inevitably attract the attention of monsters, realize who they were, and were taken to Camp Half-Blood to be trained on how to take care of themselves and all other things they would need to know about the world they were born to be a part of. Some who didn't were raised in orphanages, but they seldom made it to double digits before dying, either running away and getting caught by monsters on the streets or not being picked up by the web of Satyr's Camp Half-Blood, had working for them and dying as they got too old and monsters found them. There were exceptions, but they were few and far between. Obviously, such minimalistic chances of survival did not fill her with confidence in leaving her son in the care of inadequate unseeing mortals. Directly taking her son to Camp Half-Blood, now or ever, didn't appeal to her either. He would grow up in admittedly a safe place surrounded by demigods trained to fight and survive, but would also be confined to the same camp, learning nothing of the outside world. Most importantly, would be influenced and taught by male heroes who all had some fatal flaw or another on top of being typical male heroes. Arrogance, greed, lust and multitudes of character flaws followed them like water was wet. She did not want her son to grow up to be like so many men. That would somewhat invalidate her many arguments of proper child rearing if she left her own child's upbringing to others, then blamed them for the way her own son turned out. At the same time, if she tried to take a more active role in his life, it could potentially lead to a myriad of unfortunate events that plagued the lives of demigods. The wonderful example her family presented in the sort of tragedies their children went through due to their direct intervention or excessive oversight in their lives made her doubt her own involvement. What if by taking an active role I inadvertently make his life more difficult? Thoughts of the similar vein hung in her mind like a stubborn mist. No, I would be nothing like Lord Zeus, he's married to Hera, and such any tragedies that follow his children are mostly due to her. Athena's children have incidents with Lord Poseidon's children due to their long rivalry, though some have cooperated like they once did to make the chariot. The only god or goddess I have contention with is Aphrodite considering the sort of tragedies she's orchestrated. It would be child's play to make his life miserable. Aphrodite, despite being a goddess of something as harmless as love and beauty, was truly a force to be reckoned with. Being born when the blood of the primordial god of heaven Zeranos fell into the ocean after he was sliced into thousands of pieces by his son Kronos, creating sea foam. She was technically the oldest Olympian and one of the most powerful ones. The fact that Aphrodite caused the Trojan War because she received the apple of discord and thought Paris and Helen looked cute together was not lost to Artemis. She stood there, holding her son in her arms as she looked at him, lost in thought, and he looked at her, completely oblivious and entirely innocent. If any monster or wild beast found him on his own, especially if he was on his own in the forest, that's it. She just remembered this wasn't the first time she had found herself taking care of a newborn babe. Atalanta, I can take care of him the same way I did Atalanta. When he's old enough, he'll definitely join the hunt. This is perfect, this way he is protected from Aphrodite, and my hunters can raise him, ensuring he doesn't end up like so many male heroes. I'll never forgive myself if that happened. And Apollo would never ever shut up about it. She looked up at the night sky, stars glittering in the backdrop as the moon continued its eternal vigil, to check the time. She summoned her moon chariot and within moments, it gracefully dove down from the skies above before settling in front of her perfectly. Pulled by her famed silver-horned golden reindeers, its silver frame shone with a serene light, but radiated with power. She climbed aboard, careful to keep a tight hold of her son with one hand, while the other held the reins. A flick of the wrist was all it took, and soon she was racing across the night sky, faster than she would normally go, undoubtedly drawing the ire of her uncle, Poseidon, as her chariot's movements had some influence on the way tides and currents flowed in the ocean. She would apologize later. Maybe. Probably not, since he destroyed one of her favorite temples during one of his temper tantrums, which caused an earthquake in Ephesus. She raced across the skies, tunic and hair fluttering in the air. She looked down to double-check that her son was okay when a thought came to her. I haven't given you a name yet, have I, little one? Let's see. Artemis was rather new at the whole naming their kid thing as. Shocker. She thought long and hard. There were precious few Greek heroes whose name didn't bring with it some bad memories or have a tragic end. Perseus came to mind, but she didn't like it. She felt it didn't suit her son. She wanted a unique name. Narit. She smiled at the name. How do you like the sound of that? You shall be the embodiment of moral virtue for the world to see, and you shall excel beyond all. For the first time that night she smiled, and it seemed Narit was happy too, either at the name or her she couldn't tell, but the wriggling and gurgling told her what words didn't need to. Utah Lake, 3 years later. I know, wanna, came the cry of a child. Out by the lake there was a cave hidden from prying eyes in a secluded forest, unreachable by any who weren't invited. The personal domains of gods and goddess were protected by powerful magic, and to intrude upon them would be a great transgression. As such, it proved to be the perfect spot for Narit to be raised by the Serenian hind. With Atalanta, Artemis had sent a mother bear to care for her, but with her own child, she decided to err on the side of caution. In the event some monsters were attracted and managed to find Narit, then her sacred animal would be able to kill the monster or escape with her son. A snort was Narit's only response as the great doe was hardly amused with his antics. Narit's strong suit was most definitely not in studying. The book he was meant to be reading, a kid's version of the Theogony by Hesiod, was rather advanced for his age, but it was the most unifying collection of stories that Narit would need to know. The fact it was in ancient Greek might have made a 3-year-old reading it impossible, but being a demigod meant the language was already hardwired in him. You know, make me. Stubbornness seemed to be a core virtue in Narit, whether that would prove to be a boon or a curse was yet to be seen, but to the Serenian hind, it was most definitely not a boon, anything but a boon. With that declaration Narit up and ran off. Clearly this wasn't the first time he pulled the stunt, as all the great doe did was release a long drawn-out breath, very similar to that of a sigh, before going off to retrieve her wayward ward. Utah Lake. Narit lay on the grass outside, covered in scratches and dirt, his tunic was sweaty, even a stray twig caught in his hair which he pulled out once he felt like he wasn't going to die. You always win. He pouted, leveling the most non-threatening glare ever to a doe, larger than a bull and horns that bristled like a Macedonian phalanx. The Serenian hind simply flicked her ear and nudged him with her snout, urging him up. It was starting to get dark, and during their games of tag, she came across the smell of a monster once or twice. They were probably several miles outside Artemis's boundary, but she didn't want to risk Narit being sniffed out by them when they became more active during the night. She once again urged him up and this time he complied, far too tired to try and argue about staying outside. All he wanted was to take a bath in the pool and sleep, so he blearily walked back in the direction of their home. Utah Lake. Every now and then the Serenian hind would leave the cave at night. Narit was never sure why she left at the late hours, but he never complained, even if he did feel lonely sometimes. It let him do his favorite hobby after all. Once he waited a couple of minutes, until after he stopped hearing the great doe's gentle footfalls, hoof-falls whatever it was called, he opened his eyes. Looking around, he saw the empty cave, devoid of anyone else. His eyes were automatically drawn to the fire a couple meters away from him. He didn't know how it worked, how it started, or what kept it going, as the logs never seemed to burn out. But whenever sunset came and it got dark, it would automatically light up and illuminate their home. Moving on, he spied the pool of freshwater at the back as it reflected the light given off from the fire and glowed with a beautiful mix of green and blue onto the ceiling. He knew the light reflected off from the water plants and shiny rocks he saw at the bottom like a little sea with its insulated ecosystem. The underwater lake feeding into the little pool by a fissure in the bedrock. After his visual inspection he got up from his bed, made of various animal pelts and feathers he rose as silently as he could, making his way out. Past a lichen that hung from the ceiling, hiding the light of the fire and obscuring the inhabitants of the cave from those outside. Past the bend he looked around outside at the mouth of the cave to make sure a particular doe wasn't around. Nice. He whispered to himself. If tonight was like any other nights, he would have plenty of time before she came back. Quick as he could, he started climbing up the side of the mountain their cave was in. All that practice from running around playing catch with a doe wasn't all just fun and games. Well, it was for Narit, but the Serenian hind was subtly teaching him how to travel without leaving behind too obvious a trail, run somewhat quietly and track while training his stamina and speed. All good things he would need when he grew up. He soon found his way up to the top, his legs swinging over the lip of the cave as he wrapped himself in one of his pelts. It was a chilly night, nearing the end of September. The warmth of summer was starting to give way to the cold embrace of autumn. As he gazed up at the moon, he felt a certain level of comfort as he always did. He knew his mother was Artemis, the goddess of the moon, but he had never actually met her. From what he read, the most common theme among the demigods was that very few had many interactions with their godly parent. That made Narit a little sad, but he could understand it. Kinda. Not like he knew anything else. Artemis was probably busy, killing monsters and all that godly job stuff she had to do. They had to have lots of responsibilities, right? Not like you could tell with how much free time they had, showing up whenever humans said dumb things to them. He just started to read about prominent groups, and the Amazons were first, and he knew it was because of the alphabet. I guess studying is useful. He gave a shudder when he said that out loud. Better not let the Serenian hind know I said that, but there was another group mentioned that caught his eye, the Hunters of Artemis, he murmured to himself. There was a brief mention of them, how they followed his mom on her adventures. But at the same time a place called Camp Half-Blood also sounded like a good place for demigods. He could make friends with all the people there and they might have people around his age. They were taught by Chiron himself, the one who trained all heroes ever. When he asked a Serenian hind about it all, she just said that Artemis would tell him herself when she came to visit him on his upcoming birthday. And he couldn't wait. Meanwhile, at the exact same time. Lake Michigan. Much like her brother Apollo, every night Artemis would have a fragment of herself drive her moon chariot across the sky, as was her duty as the goddess of the moon. Sometimes if she was too preoccupied with her own obligations, she would ask the retired moon titan Selene to do so. Whilst it may have made her weaker than if she was whole, the majority of her essence was currently on a hunt with her hunters, chasing a couple dragons that had been terrorizing the local nature spirits. Nothing that could truly threaten her on her own, and certainly not while she was with her handmaidens. To describe the feeling of being in two places at once to someone who wasn't a god or goddess who could do that same was difficult. Seeing out of two separate sets of eyes and living two different experiences often miles and miles apart was something they just got used to over time. Ever since she took over as goddess of the moon, she became very familiar with the sensation. As she ran alongside her trusted lieutenant of several millennia, Zoe Nightshade, she felt a sense of fulfillment as the rest of the hunt closed in on their prey. The dragons having fled upon hearing the horns of the hunt, the final sound many wild beasts heard before their demise. The smaller part of herself that was driving the moon chariot high up was the one who saw her son sat up on top of the cave. Just in time to see her sacred animal finish doing a quick border check before returning and chastising her son before they both made their way back inside. As they ran, she smiled to herself, chuckling slightly. Whilst it wasn't uncommon for the goddess to outwardly display such happiness, it was normally after a successful hunt or when welcoming new members. Zoe was an attentive individual and as such, noticed the good mood her patron was in. "Mladdie, is something on thy mind?" The innocuous question seemed to snap the goddess out of her thoughts, and she tilted her head to the side, neither slowing their pace as they could hear the heavy footsteps of the dragon up ahead, followed by a loud booming sound. "Nothing to be concerned about, Zoe, prepare yourself, Phoebe has already fired the first shot." As soon as she finished speaking, they stopped and quickly had to dodge to either side as the dragon crashed into the ground, having fallen after one of its wings were shredded by a gunpowder arrow laced with celestial bronze. Zoe was curious about the obvious deflection shown by her goddess, but she pushed that aside. For now, the most pressing concern she had was the rather angry-looking 20-meter-long dragon that was right in front of her. Completely unfazed by the gaze which petrified lesser people, an arrow soon found itself buried within the angry red eye, causing the dragon to shriek in pain before lashing out randomly, now that it couldn't see. Earth and foliage kicked up as it continued thrashing, even as more arrows rained down from around it. Things were going well, until things didn't go so well. The second dragon that had been silent until now burst into the clearing with a vengeance. Knocking a couple trees down, causing some hunters to fall from their perch and others to be thrown from the flailing limbs. Zoe grimaced as their roars tore through the air. Utah Lake, 10th October. Narit was going to have a super day. Today was his 5th birthday, so as a treat, he was allowed to basically do whatever he wanted. There were some rules still, but that was fine. In the afternoon he would go further from the cave than he was previously allowed to. Perks of growing up. Before, when he had asked why he couldn't go further, he was told since he was a demigod, monsters like those in the Theogony would be attracted to him and try to kill him. At his shocked face, his guardian had reassured him the barrier around the forest kept them all out, but it never hurt to be extra cautious. He totally never ever tried to go beyond where he was meant to go. Never. Perished the thought. Okay, so maybe he did try a couple of times to go where he wasn't meant to be, but before he got too far the Serenian hind would always catch up to him and he'd get into a load of trouble. But now he had whole new areas to explore. Fingers crossed he would be able to find something cooler than that plunge pool he found last week or that rapid that had frozen over last year. Sliding across that had been very fun, minus all the times his face met the ice, but no one was watching so they didn't count. As soon as he finished his lunch, he bolted, keeping an orange on him as a snack in case he got hungry. Running through the nearby forest was boring, it was very beautiful, but having spent so long exploring and running around it already he knew all the interesting parts. What he was after was the unexplored. There was this canyon that he saw from a tall tree he climbed the day before. It had this cool river that snaked across the bottom, he was sure he would be able to find something neat in there. He absent-mindedly combed his hand through this shoulder-length auburn hair, his eyes scanned the undergrowth around him as he kept his eyes peeled. He had run, eager to explore the unknown, but soon got sidetracked when he stumbled across the tracks left by what looked like a family of wild boars. At least, that's what he thought he was looking at, he was pretty sure those tracks had been made at around the same time judging from the smell. As he followed the tracks, he heard the gentle gurgling of a small stream. As he neared the stream and the vegetation started to thin, he got a better look. There, drinking in the stream was a huge moose. Its massive antlers that looked like cupped hands on either side pointed at him like a shield as it drank the fresh flowing water. The rest of its herd was around it, some drinking, some feeding, while others kept a lookout for any predators. On his side of the bank he could indeed see the little family of wild boars. Hopefully I can track that cheating doe and catch next time, he grumbled to himself. It was so not fair to use his mom's blessing to run in their games. It didn't even leave anything to track in the first place. He stayed low, careful not to make a sound and hiding himself from their sight behind a bush. He had plenty of time, the sun was high with a few puffy white clouds in sky. The darker rain clouds all having already let down their load as it rained an awful lot the past couple weeks. It gave everything a fresh clean look and he could smell the rich earthy smell that normally followed. He was tempted to climb a tree and simply watch the clouds, but he felt like he had too much energy to be able to sit still, not matter how comfortable it might have been. Not really his style. Once he had seen enough, he backed away quietly, not wanting to startle them, before he ran off to find something else. Utah Lake, later that day. It was a very content Narit who ambled back home as the sun started make its way further west. He had found a couple cool things, a large dam built by some beavers with their young nestled safe inside. He even found a group of squirrel monkeys as they swung up around the high tops of the trees. He had to be careful to make sure their droppings didn't land anywhere near on him. He learned that lesson a long time ago and now he always looked up when taking in his surroundings. Once was one time too many in his opinion. It took ages to wash off the smell and a certain someone just wouldn't shut up about it for weeks. The highlight of his day had been seeing a massive grizzly bear. As it padded along, followed by her cubs, rummaging around for berries and going about its business. She had noticed Narit standing there watching her, but it ignored him. Instead going on about her business unperturbed. It's not like he was a threat, he was only just bigger than her cubs. And on his explorations went through just about every nook and cranny that he came across, he found all sorts of new things. But as it got later and he traveled further, he got tired. Having seen enough for the day, he took a different route on his way back. When he got to the clearing, he noticed someone sitting on the log just outside the entrance, the Sharingan hind resting its head on her lap as she stroked it. Their long auburn hair and pale skin was eerily similar to his own. When she looked up and made eye contact with him, he felt a little jolt inside as he instinctively knew exactly who was in front of him. He wasn't sure how long he stood there frozen for, like a surprised deer, his nerves took a hold of him and he froze. She must have sensed his shock, or maybe he was just that obvious, but she smiled gently and patted the seat next to her. That broke him out of his reverie as he remembered to breath and came closer. He was so nervous he didn't even realize he was already sat down and started fidgeting with the edge of his tunic, unsure of what to say. Artemis meanwhile was looking at Narit with a little uncertainty. Honestly, she was a little uneasy about seeing her son after so many years. It was easy to drop by when he was younger and still a baby, but now that he was a child, she was less certain. But seeing just how nervous he was, she decided it was her responsibility to take the first step. Gods don't normally see their demigod children a lot due to the ancient laws enforced by my father Zeus. She started. That seemed to break him out of whatever thoughts he was having as he looked up at her, not sure how to respond. But I've never been much of a typical goddess, spending most of my time out in the mortal world hunting monsters. Being a maiden goddess, that rule never meant much to me. I had my personal group of hunters who would follow me on my various hunts and adventures, whom I treat like my daughters. Whilst I may have adopted them into my family, none were ever my own children. Narit continued to just look at her, not knowing where this was going. But you are my first and only child. I think that deserves an exemption, don't you think? Let's not advertise it though, call me Mlady or Lady Artemis like my hunters do. The gentle curve of her lips into a smile and kind eyes that were the exact same as his own dispelled the nervousness that plagued Narit earlier as the silence between them was broken. Conversation flowed from then on as he told her everything and anything. They talked for hours, she told him about her various hunts and adventures, stories spanning back millennia, and he listened with rapt attention, soaking in every single word. When she told him of her hunters and how they accompanied her, he had immediately asked if he could join the hunters. My hunters have traditionally been an all-female group she had started. Narit was crestfallen at that, but Artemis's next words instantly brought him back up, but there have been a handful of males who have joined my hunt before. She held out her right hand and in a flash of light, she was holding a bow and a quiver full of arrows. It looked to be made of silver, its elegant curves near the center protruded outwards and ended in an elongated straightened end more parallel to the string. This is my present to you, she said as she handed it to him. It is a reflex bow like my own, powerful, but a very difficult bow to master. This size will be a good start for now, but as you grow older, the bow you use gets larger. She said before giving it to Narit. My hunters normally use a recurve bow with most starting with straight bows. I'll teach you everything I can in the time we have. I hear you like a challenge. The Sharingan hind snorted, clearly amused at the understatement, and Narit shot her a dirty look. Turning back to Artemis, he nodded eagerly, tightly clutched his new gifts. We shall see if you can hit a target 5 meters out before the night is over. Some might say she was being too ambitious. Most would need days to be able to even learn how to properly maintain a bow like his, let alone start to shoot it. But he was her son, and she is the greatest archer in the entire world, no one could match her prowess. She was definitely better than Apollo no matter what he said, older siblings were always right. Narit must have hit his second wind because he immediately sprung up from his seat, massive smile radiating eagerness, eyes practically glowing with glee. Artemis laughed gently, her hand coming to a rest upon his head to stop his bouncing, but she could still feel him vibrating with energy. HHHMMM. Longer hair would make it easier for him to blend in with the hunters. You should keep your hair long. It looks good on you. Oh, okay, thanks m'lady Artemis. He mumbled as he blushed, unconsciously brushing a few strands behind his ear. Good. Now let us start with the beginning. First thing, the string of your bow. Utah Lake. Artemis was over the moon. Pun intended. She couldn't believe how naturally her son managed to learn everything she set out for him, excelling in some more than others, but never failing to learn anything set out by her. She had expected some difficulties since her sacred animal had talked about his trouble with sitting still and studying. Seems he much preferred to learn by doing, as evident by right now. His handling of the stringing was perfect, she only had to do it in front of him once, and he was able to replicate her exactly although bending the bow itself had proven more of a challenge given his age, but that was understandable if somewhat entertaining. Watching as he wrestled with it like a wild animal. Once they had covered maintenance, something he did with such fluidity that it was hard for her to remember this was his first time learning how to do so, they had started drawing straight after. There were things to fix with it, but as a first attempt it was admirable and given the short time they had, she would leave it to one of her hunters to teach him properly. Despite his imperfect stance, his shooting was superb, managing to hit the target on the first try and subsequent shots only getting closer and closer to the bullseye, hitting it on the 9th shot. As expected of my son, the bow is your natural weapon. It seems our time is up though. I have to depart to rejoin my hunters. The moon was high in the sky, her hunters would undoubtedly be curious as to where she had gone. Narit, who was glowing from the praise, looked downtrodden at the news, clearly enjoying their time together. Do you know where you would like to go? She asked him. This is where the situation was entirely out of her hands. Despite him asking about if he could join the hunt, he had also asked her about Camp Half-Blood. She had told him everything he would need to know about both places. Enough to decide on where he wanted to go next year, for he had to leave soon. His knowledge of what he was meant more monsters were being attracted, and her sacred animal suspected the frequency of near misses and attacks was only going to increase as time carried on. She could only hope she had advertised her hunters enough but tried not to be biased, giving the benefits and detriments fairly. If he chose to go to Camp Half-Blood instead, then she would accept it, unwilling to force him to join despite her many grievances with the idea. Narit was rather torn. On one hand, after being told in more detail about Camp Half-Blood, it seemed like the natural place to go. After all, it was filled with other demigods like him, with games of capture the flag and chariot races, loads of boy and girls, tons of activities, the list went on. But with the hunters, there were the hunts and adventures, the traveling, and of course accompanying Artemis herself, his own mother. Sure, he might not have spent loads of time with her, but he felt this natural connection, unsurprising given their relation. Artemis and her hunters were like her daughters, and since he was her son that meant they would be like his sisters, they were kind of like one big family. That last point was the deciding factor though. If he went to Camp Half-Blood, sure, he might have made lots of friends, but as the only child of Artemis, he would sit and eat on his own table, do all the activities on his own, live in cabinate on his own. He wouldn't have a family. And for some reason, an ache started in his chest, a completely novel sensation, so why did it feel so familiar? Maybe it was expected of a child to want to be with their parent, but that wasn't the only reason for Narit. It was the sense of home, the sense of belonging he felt when he was with Artemis, she was family. Nothing else mattered as much as that, he knew what his priorities were, family. His precious people would always come first, nothing would ever change that. With that in mind, it was an easy decision where before he was unsure. I would like to join your hunt laddie. Artemis was ecstatic, everything went exactly like she wanted. I shall come again in around a year's time from now with my hunters, for now practice, train, and you shall become the greatest hunter the world has ever known. She stood up, Narit following suit when a whooshing sound made him look up and gawk. A silver chariot swung down from the sky, twisting and arching through the air, driven by golden reindeers the size of bears and antlers of silver. The chariot looked like a work of art, a heavy S-shaped curved forward and back, front emblazoned with a symbol of the bow before transitioning smoothly to the sides. The whole chassis sat on long rails sitting underneath that curved at the ends like a snail's shell with wheels on the side sitting on the same plane. It reminded him of something he read in his studies. What was it again? Something to do with an old guy called Nicholas's. He snapped out of his thoughts when Artemis patted his shoulder. If you ever need to contact me, pray to me. I may not be able to respond most of the time due to my duties, but know that I will have heard you. And with those parting words she was off. Utah Lake, a year later. Narit was tired. He spent most of his days super busy ever since his mother, Artemis, had visited him on his 5th birthday. That felt like ages ago, combing a hand through his hair to get it out of his face, now reaching noticeably past his shoulders. He was tired. It had been a hard day today. The wind blowing through the trees was something he wasn't used to thinking about. I need to be able to what was it again? Compensate. That's it. I need to compensate for the wind blowing. At first it didn't make that much of a difference, but when he started shooting from further out, wind had a bigger effect on the flight path of the arrow. The books he read about archery were very detailed. They talked a lot about the maths which he didn't understand, but the words and things like wind resistance and drag and some other terms made sense. Mostly. Sometimes. Okay, so maybe he was more looking at the pictures, but it's not his fault he couldn't understand the words. He couldn't even ask the Cyrenean hind for help nowadays. Most of the time she was out, and whenever she came back, she would be really tired and just lay down before falling asleep. Narit didn't have the heart to disturb her when she was obviously so worn out, instead letting her rest. Stupid person who wrote the stupid book with stupid hard to read words. Why write something if no one can understand it? It makes no sense. Those and similar grumbles continued as he walked into the clearing, wanting nothing more than to freshen up and lay down with the sleeping doe so he could snack after a long and hard training session, and immediately froze. He wasn't sure what it was, but he felt something different. It wasn't like he could sense other people's presence, no, but the ground of the clearing, it looked off. There wasn't a way to describe it really. Maybe it was his numerous games of catch with the Cyrenean hind that she didn't have the time or energy for, or maybe it was his own practice from when he was out exploring and following animals as they went about their lives. But now, as he stood in the clearing and carefully looked around, he could tell there had been a large group of people here not too long ago. This is not normal. He cautiously approached his cave, bow drawn, and arrow notched as he silently sidestepped closer. He didn't know who might have come here, but he wasn't taking any chances. Maybe it was some monster that had human feet. There were definitely some stranger monsters he read about. Glad for once there weren't that many pictures in the theogony. Using the arrow to push past a lichen, he found the cave completely empty. That was a good thing since that meant no monsters. It was also a very bad thing because the Cyrenean hind was asleep when he left and normally stayed asleep till night fell and she would head out. The fact she wasn't here was very strange. Did the people who came here took her? Is she okay? He walked out the cave, looked down, noticing something he'd missed earlier. The footsteps showed the people had stopped in the clearing, but there were also noticed some weird tracks which he now saw as them leaving in the same direction they came from. Putting away his stuff, he looked up to check the time using his hands to shield his eyes from the sun's glare. The sun was still fairly high in the sky, probably a couple of hours before it set and started to get darker. Normally, as much as he wanted to stay out late into the night running through the forest and practicing his shooting, the great doe was very insistent about staying away from the boundary because of the monsters that became more active at night. Seeing her as tired as she was, he reluctantly obeyed, not wanting to make her life harder, but now that there was the chance that she was in danger, he was going to have to break that rule. He was even prepared to leave the boundary, something he had promised never to do unless the situation was dire. Just as he was about to head out in the direction the footsteps took away from the clearing, people suddenly melted out from the forest. Their silver clothes somehow perfectly camouflaged them in the green foliage, not entirely sure how that worked with the clashing colors, but whatever. All of them looked older than him, around the age of 10-16, and if they were hostile, looked very dangerous, judging from the bows they all held. Leading them was one of the older looking ones, a tall girl with long dark hair adorned with a silver circlet. Her coppery skin making her look like a Persian princess as her angular face held a regal and noble quality. By her side was someone who could terrify the Minotaur. Ginger hair shaved at the sides but long on top gave her a dangerous look, grey eyes resembling an angry storm about to let loose. She was tall, a couple inches taller than the one with the silver circlet, and the sleeveless shirt she wore showed off her toned arms. The most intimidating part though, all their eyes were fixed on him and they seemed a bit irritated. Chapter 3. Rocky Mountains. Looking down at the lake before her, she could see the reflection of the landscape ever so slightly blurred by the slow flow of the crystal clear water. She watched as it calmly meandered downstream, as if the beckoning cold of the winter season was making it sleepy, urged on only by gravity and the gentle breeze. The local naiads who lived here were responsible for the water's movements but were rather preoccupied right now, which explained the gentle lapping of the water at the shore, not even a foot away from where she stood. The hour was late, and the peaceful sounds of a sleeping forest was like a lullaby to those as in tune with nature as nature spirits. Since she had just finished her patrol route, she decided to head back as the first snow of the year started to fall. Walking back to their temporary campsite, she heard a sharp whistle, similar to that of the cry of a golden eagle, and her ears pricked up unconsciously. Soon she broke through the foliage and into a clearing, seeing their characteristic semicircular formation of tents as her sisters milled about attending to one task or another. One of the silver-cloaked girls, Cypriots, let her hand fall from her lips, having just blown on a silver whistle, its sharp note piercing the quiet night. Almost immediately, dozens of wolves and hunting falcons flitted around the edge of the clearing. The harmonized howls of the pack sounded as a greeting before their shadowy outlines faded back into the forest as they took on the role of sentinels and looksouts, patrolling the surrounding forestry. Her eyes carried on sweeping the camp, inspecting, as each pulled their own weight. Carrying out their responsibilities with practiced ease as they seamlessly worked together. Happy with her inspection so far, she was about to assist with preparing the campfire when someone bumped her shoulder like a cat calling for attention, if the cat was nearly 6 foot that is. "Hey you." She instantly knew who it was even if she hadn't immediately recognized their voice before turning around. Few in the hunt would greet her in such a familiar way, and even fewer still were built like a professional wrestler. Gray eyes met as she saw one of most trusted companions. Phoebe must have just returned from her own scouting run, rather late considering its length, and she would know since she had been the one to assign tasks and knew what route Phoebe was given. Her coat's condition was far from pristine, and that raised an eyebrow in curiosity. Ran into some of Lycaon's dogs nearer the mountains. After a brief skirmish, we managed to maim some and kill a couple, but the rest escaped. We tried to pursue them but lost them in the valleys. Zoe nodded at the succinct report. It did explain the rather late return and emptiness of Phoebe's quiver. She would have to restock from the armory. Their impromptu hunt was for Lycaon and his lycanthropes, who could only be hurt by silver weaponry. Not even celestial bronze, the mainstay metal of choice for monster-killing weapons, could hurt them. It was why they were normally the ones to hunt Lycaon and his ilk. Incidentally, it also meant they had been in a rather long hunt that never really ended, not decisively at the very least. For Lycaon was clever, being the king of Arcadia before he was transformed as punishment meant he was a sly foe. Tactics and stratagem were things he studied in depth in preparation for his rule. His reign was cut short because he sought to test Zeus of his godhood by feeding him the roasted flesh of his own son. And being a monster meant even after death, his soul would slowly reform in Tartarus and would once again return. How long it has this hunteth been going on f''r. It felt like a long time, but it couldn't have been longer than a couple months. Most likely because we keepeth doing this, cycles of hunting Lycaon then breaking off at the point of continuing is unfeasible. There were several hunts like that, not many could evade the hunters of Artemis when they were the hunted, but there were some who were powerful or cunning enough. All of them were notoriously dangerous or just legendary for the evasiveness, like the Tumeshan fox. She had to report to Lady Artemis first though, who for the entire day had been rather withdrawn. Whilst this might not have seemed like a strange occurrence considering most gods kept their distance from mortals, their children especially, Artemis was different. Artemis would regularly spend time with her hunters during their hunt and even their more recreational time off. She normally took the form of 16-year-old girl, the average age appearance-wise of her hunters, to be less intimidating and more approachable by the younger girls who joined the hunt. Today though, she had let them pursue Lycaon on their own and had retreated to her personal tent as soon as it was set up. Having spent nearly 2,000 years by her lady's side she knew something was troubling her or at the very least extensively occupying her thoughts. She didn't know what it could be. They had plenty of hunters, their supplies were stable, no recent attacks, no one was killed or permanently maimed, and their last several hunts had all gone well. Lycaon was an exception since he was among a handful of hunts that were deemed long-term and part of what could be considered a war being fought, but even then, they had culled his numbers significantly. She stood at the entrance to the tent, not moving to push aside the canvas. Expecting, like many times before, to be granted entrance when Lady Artemis bid her welcome in short order. Whatever was on Lady Artemis's mind must have been extraordinary because it took her deliberately coughing to get her lady's attention and entry to be permitted. As she entered, she was greeted by the familiar warmth of the hearth that sat in the center and the various pelts that hung upon the walls. Lady Artemis's exquisite antler-shaped reflex bow sat in its stand behind her. The only missing thing was the constant presence of the Cyrenian hind, who could normally be found by her lady's side, but for nearly a decade her lady's sacred animal was nowhere to be seen. Lady Artemis, 3 were brief skirmishes against Lycaon's ilk, but nothing decisive. We hast gathered Evrian and hath calling off the hunteth. Campeth has been set up and dinner is about to starteth. Lady Artemis smiled fondly at her trusted lieutenant. It has been a while now Zoe, the way people speak has changed from what you are used to. Be sure to adapt to the changing times lest you find yourself stagnating in still waters. Zoe nodded in understanding, a frown marring her forehead. Much as she tried, linguistic habits die hard, it would take time to adjust to modern speech patterns. It had not been that long since everyone spoke the way she did. Lady Artemis let out a deep breath before seeming to gather her thoughts as she looked up at her trusted lieutenant. After dinner, I have an announcement to make and everyone will need to be present. Prepare yourself, I believe there will be discord when everyone hears the news. Zoe was rather confused now, her brow once again scrunching slightly in thought. All the hunters personally swore their loyalty to Lady Artemis for one reason or another, most because they were saved by Lady Artemis from horrible circumstances perpetrated by men. She tried to think of something that could possibly be contentious enough to sow such discord for even Lady Artemis to be concerned over, but nothing came to mind. As absorbed into her own thoughts as she was, she didn't notice Lady Artemis had already stood and was waiting by the entrance, holding the flap open. Come, let us enjoy the night. I believe Phoebe has managed to scour some fresh herbs, judging by the smell of the stew. Zoe shook her head, whatever it was, nothing could break their sisterhood. As she left the tent, she saw all her sisters were gathering around the campfire. They had experienced so much in all their long lives it was difficult to imagine what could possibly have Lady Artemis concerned. Dinner was a pleasant and more drawn-out affair, as today was the final day they would be pursuing Lycaon. As was tradition at the end of a hunt, they celebrated. Although the Lycaon hunt was unsuccessful, their original goal had been a flock of harpies, and that is what they were celebrating tonight. Whilst they didn't manage to kill Lycaon himself, they had trimmed his pack's numbers by a fair few and would force him to lay low as he recuperated. Tomorrow they would either take a break or dive straight into their next hunt. God, she hoped they would get a break. Much as she loved hunting with Lady Artemis and her sisters, the hunts they would go on were always challenging, packs of griffins, a chimera, a cyclops den to name a few. Amiable conversations mixed in with the occasional laughter bled into the night sky, the smoke from their offerings curling into the air as it drifted heavenwards. The sound of a lyre wafted through the clearing, a gentle tune being plucked accompanied by a soft humming, courtesy of Philino. Everyone was in a good mood tonight. The only reason they had started pursuing Lycaon was because a patrol of theirs had run into an errant group of his lycanthropes. They had just finished hunting a flock of harpies, so the timing was perfect. The hunt itself was less than perfect, but since their original hunt was a complete success, the failure to end Lycaon's pack was overshadowed. Rocky Mountains. She had spent the better part of the past couple days thinking about one thing in particular. It was nearly Narit's 6th birthday. The month of September brought with it the first chills of colder times ahead, and the snow that capped the surrounding mountains were starting to grow. Being a moon goddess also meant she had a fantastic intuition when it came to the times of the year, who'd have thought. She wasn't sure there was any other way of telling her hunters besides telling them all at once, but it was the following questions and concerns that would inevitably be raised that she was unsure of how to respond to. Not telling them until they met him was a no-go, that was just asking for trouble, like stealing Lord Zeus's thunderbolt or letting a mortal drive the sun chariot. Bad endings all around. Perhaps she was worrying too much about it, perhaps she was overthinking the situation and her hunters would be content with it. But despite being a younger goddess compared to her other Olympian brethren, she was considered one of the more battle-hardened and wary ones. Should she be more heavy-handed or take a more withdrawn approach? She heavily disfavored outright ruling over her hunters by ignoring what they said, enjoying their individuality and independence, but if Narit was rejected, the joining of a male to the hunt was always going to be a difficult issue, and certain hunters would be more vocal about their disagreement. The older ones tended to be more accepting, most had been around when Hippolytus had joined, and only 2 were there for Orion, so the overall opinion shouldn't be overtly negative. What concerned her the most would be the revelation of the parentage of Narit. Most of her hunters had been with her for nearly a millennium at least, there were a couple newer members, but even they had been with her for several hundreds of years. It had been a long time since they had had new members join the hunt, the lack of casualties meant the hunt was at a decent size of 20 hunters. Although, technically, if they counted the numerous nature spirits like nymphs, dryads, nereids, naiads and osinids spread throughout the continent, then they had well over 100 members. But they didn't join the hunt in their adventures, instead acting as a network of informants and safehouses, providing supplies when they stopped by or were in the area. It just so happened there were a couple naiads here who were her followers, but she had sent them on a mission to try and locate Lycaon. She did not want a surprise attack from him since that would be devastating, and she most certainly did not want him to be near when she told her hunters about her son. As she looked around at the happy faces of her hunters, she tried to imagine what Narit would be like if he was here right now. Cypriot's would probably be the most open, seeing as she used to be a boy before I transformed her into a girl and had her join the hunt for seeing me bathing. Whilst she was the most open, she was also one of the most adamant that females were better than males. She might even try and convince Narit to be transformed into a girl. Considering her past, she had quite the experience when it came to arguing her side. Zoe would be alright despite her strict nature, she would give Narit a fair chance. Whilst she had a deep distrust of boys in general and men more so, she had lived a long life and blind discrimination was something she abhorred. I suspect Philino would be much like Zoe, though she isn't as strict. She joined the hunt long before the whole drama about her half-sister Helen and subsequently her father's death by Menelaus upon his return home. As such, she didn't have bad experiences herself, given her status as royalty, but their travels around the world had given her an insight into the more undesirable men who sought to make others' lives a misery. The 12 nature spirits she had with her, an even mix of Osinids and nymphs, would be withdrawn at first, since they all had at least one bad experience with a persistent male before Artemis or another hunter stepped in. Hopefully they will give him a fair chance to prove he isn't like the rest, or maybe even actively take part in his education, so as to teach him, thus preventing him from turning out like the rest of the males in the world. The other side is that they will be the most vocal against him, joining their more carefree sisters were more accepting of males, but the ones who joined her hunt tended to be more on the less tolerable side. Sarah was definitely not going to be okay with a male joining the hunt. Her father had been abusive, forcing her to use her limited control over the mist to help him lie and steal. It had been because of this that the hunters had found her. Her prolific use of the mist had caused monsters to flock to where she was. Thankfully, such activity had drawn enough attention that one of their more peripheral members had noticed and brought it to their attention. As soon as they dealt with the monsters and realized the situation, they had whisked her away and she had been with them ever since. Scathach was one of the newer members of the hunt, having picked her up while they had been on the western side of the mainland, on an island across the Black Sea called Ireland, and her reaction to Narit was uncertain. She's never been unreasonably aggressive to boys whenever we come across them. Then again, the last time we visited Camp Half-Blood, she held one of them at spearpoint for looking at her for too long. There had been a nasty incident where Melano, the goddess of ghosts, nightmares and madness, had gotten a little too active in England. Since the island nation across the channel was going through a rather industrious phase, it created the perfect environment for ghost stories, rumors, and nightmares to flourish. Several times already they had to go to the capital and tame the situation to a manageable level before something irrevocable happened. She had personally raised the issue in the last solstice, but Hades had ignored her and Zeus had not heeded her warnings. Then there were Bradamante and Joan, they were from the western side of the mainland of the European continent and daughters of her brother Apollo. Both speaking the same language, they had quickly formed a close friendship and could often be seen sparring with their preferred weapons. They were both considered among the younger generation of hunters, and Bradamante, whilst being a skillful warrior, her status as a female knight had caused her many issues with jealous men trying to ruin her career and those who sought to make her their possession. Joan on the other hand would have been burned to death had they not intervened, all because of the dark machinations of men in positions of power. Whilst there is no hate, Bradamante's desire to escape from men by joining the hunt might raise concerns that would need to be allayed, but Joan should be alright, she's always been very forgiving. She's often the one who breaks up the fights in Camp Half-Blood, so she can't have an overly negative opinion of males. Last was Phoebe, not having the normal coloration of her brother Apollo's other children, having ginger hair, Phoebe was where the greatest grief would lay. She alongside Zoe were the only two hunters who were around since before the time of Orion. Unlike Zoe, Phoebe had become very close friends with Orion before he had betrayed them. That and many other incidences of trusted males betraying her trust had jaded her. Nowadays she treated all males as enemies and saw them all as something the world would be better off without. She was on the more extreme side of her hunters. She bore no ill will to Cypriot since she was a girl now, but whenever they came across a male demigod, she was almost always the first hunter to throw a punch and quick to start a fight. Her short temper certainly didn't help matters, especially whenever they visited Camp Half-Blood. It became a little game within the hunt and a betting pool always started about how long it would take for her to get into a fight. Bonus money from the pot if someone guessed from which cabin. I don't need to be an expert in psychology like that drunkard Dionysus to know Phoebe will be the most upset by Narit joining the hunt. Clearly, she had spent a lot of time psychoanalyzing her hunters to try and figure out how best to approach this. Artemis stood up, having finished eating, and instantly had everyone's attention as conversation and music ceased. All of you have worked hard and have performed admirably on yet another successful hunt. Excited nudges and whispers flitted through the camp. It was rare for Artemis to give out such praise to all of them, and it usually meant a treat of some kind was coming. I know it has been a long time since we have had a new member join the hunt, with our latest addition being young Sarah. Phoebe, who was beside her, bumped her shoulder and messed up her hair, causing her to blush irritably and try to fight of the offending limb, causing others to laugh at their antics. Artemis was keeping a close eye on all her hunters to watch their reaction. All of them were happy, looking forward to a new addition to their family, all but Zoe. And when she saw the spark of realization behind those gray eyes, Artemis knew Zoe had figured out what she meant earlier. "We will be going to pick him up at one of my sacred groves to the south of us near Utah Lake." One would be forgiven if they thought no one living was in the clearing, with the silence that permeated following her statement. You could have heard a pin drop, and the soft thump of a spoon falling to the ground penetrated the rhythmic crackling of the central hearth proved that. Well, this was always going to be interesting. The silence was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it meant there wasn't outright aggression to the idea of a male joining the hunt, that's what she was hoping at least. Maybe it was just a delayed response. A curse because, well, there was only so much one could read on a face frozen in shock, and silence could mask the indignation that was rising. Although there were a few exceptions, Zoe looked to be deep in thought, but Artemis knew her well enough that she was more considering the reactions of her sisters and how she wanted to respond, rather than the implications of a male hunter. I wonder if she will realize the way I'm announcing him joining is different from when previous males have joined. It didn't take much longer before the others recovered from their shock. Surprisingly, the Osanid seemed mostly alright with it, although Randus looked to be the most upset by the news, judging by the grip she had on her spoon, while Nephel and Sikas talked in hushed tones. Unsurprisingly, the nymphs were the less than pleased with the idea. Sarah stood up sharply in obvious irritation. Why is a boy going to be joining the hunt? Emphasizing the title like it was the worst thing that one could be. In all fairness, it probably is, judging from her own experience. The one male all children should be able to rely on had been the one to abuse her. Nephel chipped in too. She was obviously confused, but there was less anger in her question, unlike Sarah, and she kept her voice level. What makes him so special that this boy should be allowed to join the hunt? How can we be sure he won't be like so many other men? This would not be the first time a male did join the hunteth. Zoe replied, remember Hippolytus. He was an exception. Bradamante shot back, her French accent thick in her voice, there are so many more vile men out there than chivalrous ones. But judging one based on the actions of others is not right, Joan argued gently but firmly, her French accent less noticeable. The sins of the father are not inherited by the son. He is going to be living with us, constantly. Theo said, even if he swore the oath, he will be tempted. And like all men he will eventually give in and take advantage of one of us while we sleep. They all start like that, promises and offers they never keep. Her voice gaining a couple octaves near the end. What are you saying? You think Lady Artemis would be so careless? Scathach accused, the vestiges of her Irish heritage tinged her words. She would have inspected the moral fiber of such a candidate to ensure they were honorable before even considering offering them a place among us. Artemis watched it back and forth between her hunters. Noting how not a single one of her hunters brought up Orion, though she could tell a couple of them almost did, holding their tongues before it could slip out. Most likely because they know to do so would lead them to questioning my judgment. Her hunters aligned in pretty much the way she had anticipated, with a few exceptions. The Osanids being alright was a bit surprising, but then again, they didn't have to deal with the satyrs like the nymphs and dryads did. Scathach was a bit of an outlier since before joining the hunt she had already sworn off male companionship, and the few who approached her had wanted to make her their plaything, their trophy wife, due to her legendary skills as a warrior. But perhaps her having two protégés who were both males gave her a more positive outlook. That despite the overwhelming majority of the members of the opposite gender being unsavory people, that there were those who could be decent human beings. Villano's silence was telling, she obviously wasn't against the idea of a male joining, she once had younger brothers, and maybe she missed that. But she sympathized with those who had negative experiences. She was probably waiting to see how this played out before making her piece known. Phoebe's entire posture screamed livid. Hands clasped so tightly together the knuckles were white and shook with suppressed anger, lips pressed together into a thin line, and eyes narrowed. The way the muscles in her arms tensed, it was like watching a snake coiled in the grass, just waiting to lash out and sink its fangs into its unexpected prey. Zoe sat beside her, elbows resting on her knees as she simply sat by her side in an open offer of support. He is a young child, by the time we arrive he will have turned 6 years old. He was raised much like Atalanta was, I'm sure you remember her, or, for those of you who joined after her time, have learnt of her from your history lessons. He has not had any contact with other humans yet, being raised solely out in the wild. Artemis paused for a moment to prepare herself, quickly checking their surroundings to ensure no undesirables heard her next words. He is an exception because he is my son. And there goes any sense of calm. This is going to be a long night. Artemis sighed internally. En route to Utah Lake. Phoebe picked at her thumbnail as she ran. They were making their way south, spread out in small groups so as to avoid being clumped together in an ambush. She was running alongside Crocale and Thero beside a winding river so they could converse briefly with the local naiads. The sun was high in the sky at this time of the day, but one could scarcely tell, hidden away behind the thick blanket of rolling grey clouds that covered the sky for as far as the eye could see. Only residual light filtered through the thinner parts of the cloud cover, and the occasional break would allow a beam of sunlight to penetrate and reach the ground. The narrow trees they were running through were yellowing, leaves starting to fall off as autumn truly set in. Glancing to her left, she looked over the shallow valley and could truly admire the beautiful tapestry of the rising mountain to her left. The varying shades of yellow and orange of the leaves as the trees prepared themselves for the winter ahead. They had been traveling for several days now after that eventful announcement. This is all so confusing, Lady Artemis having a son. If anyone else had said so it would be ridiculous, but Lady Artemis told us so herself. I know Lady Athena is also a maiden goddess and has children, but for Lady Artemis to do the same. Arg, this was so confusing. She was completely loyal to Lady Artemis and would do whatever she asked of her. But this was something that no one could have predicted. In all the nearly 2,000 years she had served Lady Artemis, not once had she ever had a child of her own. Even when Athena had her first child and proved maiden goddesses could have children whilst maintaining their maidenhood, she never mentioned entertaining the idea to her Zo. Men have been nothing but a pest to the lives of those around them. They promise what they cannot give and say what they do not mean. They would do anything to satisfy their urges and lust. She didn't always think this was the case. At first, she was just another hunter back when the group had first started. And then Orion had come along, such a skilled hunter, and his competitiveness meant she had gotten along well with him. Always egging each other on from one challenge to the next, trying to outdo the other. When he tried to woo Lady Artemis she was devastated, but she got over it. She didn't condemn all men just because one who she was close to turned out to be nothing but a wolf in sheep's clothing. Hippolytus had been a nice guy. At first, she was more cautious, once bitten twice shy. But his honest nature had stood the test of time, and she befriended him. She was even starting to consider him as a kind of younger brother with his inquisitive nature and love for reading, but Aphrodite had worked her wicked ways, and Artemis was forced to take Hippolytus out from the hunt. From then on it was downhill for Phoebe. All the male friends she made and thought she could trust had eventually proven that they had ulterior motives. Either wanting to better or to make one of her sisters break their oaths. Each deceitful male had eventually led her to become jaded to them all. But one did not become as old as she without having a strong moral fiber. No one lasted long in the hunt without a steady moral compass, lest Lady Artemis corrected them or expelled them from the hunt. She really disliked males, hated some of them, heroes in particular. But this boy, he was 6. 6 years old was not old enough to have been corrupted by men and their wicked ways, nor was it old enough to even have the notion of doing anything of the sexual sort with girls. Puberty was later in boys than in girls after all. Even less so when she considered he had been raised out in the wild by her lady's sacred animal. That does explain where the Cyrenean hind has been all this time. There were rumors the Cyrenean hind had been injured or even caught due to her extended absence. Whilst she didn't particularly believe that rumor, the fact the Cyrenean hind had been missing and Lady Artemis' refusal to talk about her for so long inevitably it led to rumors, since rumors were all they had. What other choice do we have? This child is Lady Artemis' son. If we sent him to the Amazons, he would be treated little better than a slave, a second-rate citizen. But if we sent him to Camp Half-Blood, he would be taught and surrounded by those boys, and he would be corrupted to be just another hero. We can't just toss him out on his own. The only reason he's been safe is because Lady Artemis' sacred grove is protected, and even then. It cannot be without issues as her thoughts whirled around in her mind, less of a mess than on that night, but jumbled all the same. She was sure her sisters were also in a similar situation. She spoke to Thea and Thero after that night as they lay down and prepared to sleep. Originally, she had planned on not interacting with him at all and just wait for the inevitable attempt to woo or seduce her or her sisters, but they had spent a long time trying to convince her otherwise. She was still rather unimpressed and gave a non-committal grunt in response just so they'd go to sleep, which failed spectacularly. Apparently, they had spoken to Crocale, the oldest Osanids, and she convinced them to her side of thinking, which somehow involved them teaching the boy and raising him properly. From the impression Phoebe got, Thea and Thero were now fully committed to actively making sure this boy didn't turn out like so many of his gender. They had even tried to talk her into it. At the time she had replied with, maybe. And turned over in her bed, not wanting the conversation to continue. Unfortunately for her, Thea and Thero had kept talking and talking and talking and talking. Gods, from the way they were going they would end up talking through the night. They had even started to plan out what they would teach the boy, and they hadn't even met him. She had half a mind to tell them to be quiet as her temper was starting to get the better of her, but she knew it would do little good. If anything, that would make them talk louder just to get a rise out of her. Those two were chatterboxes on a sugar rush with an unhealthy dose of prankster mixed in. Instead, she turned to face away from them and buried her head under her pillow and blanket. En route to Utah Lake. Things could have gone worse. Artemis was rather pleased with the way her hunters took the news. Sure, there were some who were against the idea of a male joining the hunt, but that was quickly overshadowed by the news that Narit was her son. Following the revelation, she had quickly explained the circumstances of his birth. She did not want to let anyone even consider what would happen if someone had accused or even suggested she had broken her oath. Not necessarily because of her wrath directly, though that would have resulted in an extremely harsh punishment from the insult anyways. She was also concerned with how Zoe, Phoebe or even Philino would react. The mere insinuation that she had broken her oath was an insult to her honor, and to those three in particular, would have resulted in a fight. Zoe and Phoebe were her most experienced hunters and easily among her top combatants. Philino on the other hand, may have been a quiet girl, she was also one of her most combat-capable hunters. In terms of hand-to-hand she was the best, no questions asked. You wouldn't have thought so given she wasn't particularly big like Phoebe, but what she did have was a vicious streak a mile wide and the skills to carry it out. Being raised in Sparta clearly had its benefits, among them was the highest quality education in combat, alongside the greatest warriors ancient Greece had ever known. Traditionally, women weren't taught combat to such an extent, but King Tyndareus loved all his daughters dearly and made sure they could defend themselves should they need to. Apparently to him, defend themselves meant being able to put anyone on the ground and cry for their mother. Whilst she had been more nervous about her hunter's reaction to Narit's parentage, she needn't have. They were all very experienced, having been with the hunt for a long time. That meant they had traveled all across the country and been to many places, from the Amazonians' isolated island to Camp Half-Blood in the east. Camp Half-Blood was where demigods typically went to be trained to fight and survive. Having met some of the overinflated heads of the children of Zeus and Poseidon, unnerving children of Hades, the aggressive kids of Ares and Aphrodite's pushy and demanding daughters, they had developed a healthy dislike for Camp Half-Blood. Surprisingly enough, it had been Phoebe who summarized the entire situation quite neatly. For demigods, the abundance of monsters everywhere means there are precious few places where they can be trained. She stated. Camp Half-Blood to be trained by Chiron the Centaur, and we all know the sorts of heroes he produced. The Amazonians with their female-dominated society, where males are strong-armed into indentured servitude for safety. The other option is they're left to fend for themselves, the unspoken message there being that was as close to a death sentence as one could get for a demigod. Having Phoebe herself of all people looking at things so objectively, despite her well-known dislike for males, made those less receptive of Narit stop and think about the big picture. With her actually having had a child, they were shocked, but it's not like they would accuse her of lying to them. And as much as some hunters may have contested having a male join the hunt, they could all acknowledge it wouldn't be the first time it happened. She knew they would be talking about it for the entire journey, but she felt that it would do them some good. If they are given the time to confront their thoughts and discuss among themselves, I think they will come to some sort of consensus. The shock should have worn off by the time we get there at the very least. It had already been a week and they hadn't traveled too far. They were taking their time since this wasn't a hunt and she felt they deserved a reprieve given the amount of work they've been doing lately. As much as her hunters tried to be subtle about their whispers, she was the goddess of the hunt and as such, her tracking skills, including hearing, were inhumane. They were talking about her son after all, surely that meant she was allowed to eavesdrop, right? You think he looks like her? How skilled will he be with a bow? Only some of Apollo's kids are decent. Ha! You're being too kind, they suck at best. How come he's getting involved with all this now? Surely 6 is too soon. I'm certain Lady Artemis must have her reasons. Impatience is uncharacteristic of her. DSK, why are we even talking about this? Boys don't belong in the hunt. If he joins, does that mean Lady Artemis will have to stay away from us? Surely not. But he's her son. The ancient laws say. But we're different, the hunters falleth directly under Lady Artemis's domain. And you know exactly how Lord Zeus would react. This has never happened before. We'll arrive there within the month's end at the pace we're going. It would probably be best to let the hunters meet him on their own. If I'm there they might hide how they are really feeling due to his and my relation. She hoped they got there soon. From what her sacred animal had said the last time they had talked, more monsters were starting to become attracted to her grove. Just a little longer, I wonder how much he has grown since I last saw him. Utah Lake. Narit was understandably a bit shocked. This was the first time he saw another human after all. His mom visiting didn't count since she was a goddess. Turns out living in the forest and being raised by a deer the size of an overgrown bear leaned towards an isolated life and rather underdeveloped social skills. Who knew? So, forgive him if the first thing he did was not to say hi or greet them in any way shape or form, but to freeze like a deer caught in the open. They all looked rather annoyed, and the bows in their hands were probably out for a reason. Best not spook the scary girls who had dangerous sharp weapons in their hands. Little did Narit know, but the hunters had had to fight their way through several monsters in the surrounding forestry, and even more lurking at the boundary of the sacred grove as they tried to find a way past the barrier. A pack of Scythian Draconi, groups of Impausi, and even a sun dragon had to be taken out before they could cross the threshold. Narit's eyes scanned back and forth at the large group arrayed before him, but he focused on one in particular. He noted they all wore clothes with a silver color scheme, and the faint glow they all had made one thing clear: these are my mother's hunters. Looks like someone woke up on the wrong side of the bed. He was looking at the tall ginger built like a professional wrestler. Her eyebrows were cinched together, and the thin line of her mouth made it very clear to Narit she was just a tad on the miffed side, and her apparent target was him. Understatement of the century: she looks like I kicked her puppy. You're the hunters of Artemis. A faint smile tilted the lips of one of the girls. Yond is right, and thou art Narit. That's a funny way of speaking. Didn't Sheik what's his name right plays and talk like that? Snapping himself from his thoughts, he remembered his grueling lessons in proper manners from the Cyrenian hind chair. I am Narit, son of Artemis. Somewhere in Colorado. Phoebe had just returned from another long patrol. Including tonight, this would be their third night where they hadn't moved camp. They were on the outskirts of a small town called Denver to replenish their supplies. The abundance of mortals and lack of any demigod presence meant even though they weren't moving as often as they normally would, they weren't being swamped by monsters left, right and center. She parted ways with Sarah, intending to grab something to eat when she heard a commotion. Looking up, she saw Zoe walking back into camp with Narit in tow. Narit looked rather worn out, his breathing deeper and more rapid than it usually was, and the emptiness of his quiver told her he had probably been in another lesson. The two parted ways, Narit heading into his own tent, while Zoe was immediately accosted by Bradamante and Crocale. Wonder who they're talking about. She thought sarcastically, rolling her eyes with a huff. Not caring to stick around to listen in, unlike Thea who was not eavesdropping at all, she made her way to the campfire and grabbed some jerky. She stepped around Nefel who was sat down making more arrows. Just as she passed by Mara who was kneeling and collecting poppy seeds she left out to dry, she just so happened to accidentally bump her, causing her to tip forward and nearly face-plant the floor. Phoebe didn't stop to look at Mara, but she could feel her eyes drilling into the back of her skull and the sound of grinding teeth. Smiling wider at the curse Mara threw her way, she didn't even give her the satisfaction of looking back, instead waving over her shoulder and entered one of the tents. Somewhere in Missouri. During dinner, Phoebe was sat next to Zoe as she usually was, and tonight they were joined by Philino and Crocale. Between the four of them, they probably made up the oldest of the hunters. Narit was quite impressive the present day, his archery art phenomenal F''R1 so young. Philino nodded as she finished chewing her mouthful of boar stew. Indeed. Zoe, shame you didn't get to see him earlier. I was tutoring him the day before and he was a genius. His reflexes are quick and every punch or throw I teach him he learned nigh instantaneously. The basics drills were such a trifling matter I proceeded onto some of the more complex takedowns and live spars, but he had to depart with Thea and Forge. Phoebe looked at the two of them in disbelief. This was certainly high praise for one so young, and not to mention, a male of all things. Surely you're both blowing this way out of proportion. Zoe shook her head as he gently stirred her own bowl. I am not Phoebe, and after seeing his archery first-handeth I doubteth not Philino either. Somewhere in Minnesota. Narit, come here. Lunch times is over, and you need to learn the most essential skill a hunter can have. The cheery voice of Fael rang through the camp. Philino's polite-sounding but completely fake coughing drew a huff from the Osinid. You can't beat down what you can't see, Phil. Narit perked up at being called, quickly washed his plate. Again, something he was confused about using, but after another long drawn-out explanation more like lecture. From Crocale he just went with it. Seemed like there were a lot of things he needed to get used to. Phoebe quickly got up, she had cleared all her tasks prior to this and made sure she had free time right now to allow her to see Narit training herself. Fael. Hey, she greeted as she caught up, mind if I tag along? Fael was visibly confused, her dark blue eyebrows rising as her silence conveyed her unspoken question. I'm not a sexist bigot, okay? Look, I've been talking to the others and he seems alright. I just want to see how he does, you know. See what he's like before I talk to him. Please. Fael sighed, left hand going to her hip, her right combed through her hair as she leaned on her left leg. It'll be easier if you just talk to him, you know that right? At Phoebe's withering glare she held up her hands defensively. Alright, geez. I get it, bad history with dudes. But seriously, same here. Look at him though, he's a kid, he's 6. He doesn't even reach up to your hip for God's sake. He hasn't hit puberty yet, forget having a sex drive. Thus promise me you'll actually talk to him, Kay. Maybe a lesson or something, I'm sure you can teach him a thing or two. No more of this avoiding and pretending he doesn't exist while asking everybody else what he's like routine. Her hand gesturing vaguely at her to emphasize the point. Crocale said something along those lines as well just yesterday about seeing what he's like firsthand. Would it be the worst thing in the world to think he could be different? And if so many others say good things about him, but Orion was much the same, but he's a kid and he's Lady Artemis's son, and his name is rather telling. Lady Artemis certainly had high hopes for him. With a resigned sigh she lifted her head, squared her shoulders, and faced Fael. Fine, I swear I will arrange a lesson between the two of us. Fael was one of the more easygoing Asanids in the hunt, her laid-back attitude and live and let live outlook meant she didn't hold a grudge. It also meant she was one of the first hunters to talk to Narit since he was inducted into their ranks alongside Cypriots. Alongside Philino, Thero, Fael and Zo, she was one of the closest to Narit. Fael nodded and looked about to respond, but her eyes shifted behind her as she said, took your sweet time Narit. What were you doing, prettying up your hair? The teasing grin on her face morphing into a shit-eating one as Narit scowled at her. Oh ha ha, very funny. He grumbled, a slight pout crossing his face as he crossed his arms. Phoebe stiffened at the voice, how did he manage to get so close to me like that? He barely made a sound and we're in the middle of the forest. And isn't he only just about to learn how to stalk properly now? She managed to restrain her instinctive urge to put some distance between them, instead, the only sign she was surprised was the slight tensing and the clenching of her fists. What we doing today? Narit asked, as he looked between Fael and Phoebe slightly confused. Normally when he was learning something it would be under the supervision of just one hunter, his favorite lessons so far were when he learned how to take care of the wolves and hunting falcons with Fael. It started off awkward and somewhat disheartening at first, since Fael was giving him a bit of a cold shoulder which struck somewhere deep in him. The cold and unwelcoming look she would give him like he an outsider, some sort of thing instead of a person, judging him by who she thought he was, rather than who he actually was. He figured it was because of the bad history between boys and the hunters, and he was like the third guy ever to be allowed to join the hunter something. Who knew history could be so useful? A 50-50 chance he turned out to be trash or a decent person, he could kinda get how they felt. Keyword kinda. But instead of her attitude making him feel down or disheartened, he used it to drive him to change things, to make her see him for who he was, rather than who she thought he was. When he had promised to himself he wouldn't stop until he got her acknowledgement, he felt a comfortable warmth within him, and the strangest feeling that he'd been here before. It was like a niggling feeling at the back of his mind. It took a long time, lesson turned into days which turned into weeks which turned into months. Eventually Fael had just one day sat next to him as he was feeding the wolves, and they spent the rest of the time until lunch in comfortable silence. Before long Fael would often be found asking how Narit was doing with his lessons and giving him tips on how to get better. Narit was an observant kid, he liked to think so at least. And he knew that Phoebe was not a fan of his. Kinda like Fael was at first if he had to compare. He would have to be blind and deaf to not notice how she had avoided him, and it was why he was confused as to what she was doing here during one of his lessons. You're gonna be learning how to stalk. And no, not in a bad creepy way. To walk without making a sound, to keep a low profile so you don't get seen running around. Stuff like that, movement really. Should be easy since you already walk pretty quiet. Fael listed off, the side eye she gave Phoebe only seemed to aggravate the ginger next to her, and her shit-eating grin came back full force at Phoebe's reaction. As Fael taught Narit, Phoebe couldn't help but agree with what Philino had said ages ago. Narit did seem to have a knack for certain things. His movements were all so fluid, stepping off clear patches of grass, avoiding twigs which would have given him away, silently brushing past vegetation with barely a whisper. It was eerie. Done with so little visible effort and so naturally that it was like he had spent decades mastering the art. He didn't so much as trip or misstep a single time, no matter the obstacle course Fael designed in the tall swampy groves they were in. Weaving in and out of the vegetation so quickly it was like he was a shadow, his silver clothes blending into the shadows. It reminded her of a hunter with years of experience rather than just a novice. By the end of the day, when he was asked to catch a hare with his bare hands and he actually picked it up by its scruff, Phoebe was no longer surprised. Why don't we do this with cats? Narit asked and he pet it one last time before setting it down, allowing it to dash off to do whatever it was rabbits did. Summer did make the days quite hot lately. Why in the gods' names would we use a cat? Fael asked with a laugh as she gave Narit a funny look. Well, I mean, cats are agile, quick, can climb, ichno are hard to catch. Narit defended sheepishly, scratching the back of his head as he kicked a stray rock. Fael snorted at his half-hearted response, and where exactly would we find a cat here? The closest we could get to a cat is a lynx, and you definitely don't want to try and pick one of them up like you did with that rabbit. Chuckling a little as she imagined it. A lynx would be bigger than he was, forget him picking it up, all she could imagine was a chibi Narit holding onto the tail of the lynx as it ran around in circles trying to get him off. Narit laughed sheepishly at the thought of trying to pick up a lynx, but to him it had felt so natural, chasing cats. But when Fael pointed that out he couldn't help but feel a bit silly, where exactly did that idea come from? Somewhere in Colorado territory. The hunters of Artemis were once again on one of their rare extended breaks, it had been months since their last hunt and nearly a year since they were all fully involved. During their travels they had come across the occasional monster which they eliminated. They tended to do these whenever they had new recruits who were in need of training in order to become capable of taking part, however minorly, in their usual hunts. This normally happened when a clear-sighted mortal or a rather young child was inducted into their ranks. In this case, it was the latter. This meant instead of moving camp every day like they would on a hunt they would move camp every couple days, no more than a week, and the hunts they did do were smaller in scale. This could happen as the presence of Lady Artemis releasing more of her godly power would scare away the monsters attracted to them had they stayed in a single location for long. Having Sarah use the mist to reduce their presence also helped hide them from monsters. Phoebe was troubled. It had been a while now and the new boy had yet to do anything to warrant her suspicion. If anything, he had been rather eager to learn and seemed to honestly want to get along with them all. She thought back to when they first met. Flashback. No one uttered a word, stunned silence followed the brief and simple introduction. This was the flesh and blood son of Lady Artemis, the first child of the goddess of the moon in recorded history. There was little they could do but gawk at the sight. Shorter than average for his age at around 3 feet 5 inches, pale skin with a healthy glow, and surprisingly long auburn hair that was loose, going just past where his shoulder blades should be. The most distinctive part of him that was obviously inherited from Lady Artemis were the eyes. Yellowy silver like the moon and 100% identical to Lady Artemis who had very conveniently and very obviously deliberately left earlier that day, saying she had business to take care of. Fair Narit, I am Zo, lieutenant of the hunters of Artemis. Cometh, 'tis timeth to depart. Monster surroundeth us, and it wouldst beast a wasteth of timeth to square against them all. Bradamante muttered something under her breath, but an elbow from Joan silenced her. Narit eyes flicked back and forth from one hunter to another before he nodded a little hesitantly. This is it, it's finally time to leave this forest. This place was my home, but at the same time, it wasn't. Always felt like something was missing. A place where someone still thinks about you is a place you can call home, and maybe I can have a home now I know they aren't mom's kids directly, but maybe. Can I get my stuff from inside? It'll only take a minute he trailed off at the end, uncertain, they did seem to be in a rush, and if there were monsters all around them, he really didn't want to stick around if the theogony was anything to go by. But he just couldn't leave his few belongings, it was worth more than all the treasures in the world. Quick, Phoebe shall help thee packeth, but we wilt leaveth immediately. Phoebe made a choking sound, but a hard look from Zo silenced her arguments to a grumble, and she walked after Narit, who had already dashed back into the cave. Phoebe was less than pleased but followed after him. She brushed aside the hanging vegetation and took in the homely but barely furnished cave. This is not the sort of place a child should be raised in, let alone in solitude. As much as she disliked males and was utterly loyal to Lady Artemis, even she had some disapproval for such Spartan living conditions. It's going to be a shock when he sleeps in an actual bed for the first time. Let alone the buildings that humanity seems so fond of building as of late. She thought as she eyed the pelts hung up in the corner like a hammock where he had undoubtedly slept. She looked up from her inspection when Narit approached with nothing but a bow, a quiver, and the hints of a chain around his neck. He must have a hidden place to put it since I didn't see it when I came in. And is that really the only thing he owns? Are you ready? She asked, trying her best to not sound unkind, but it came out as short, nonetheless. Narit looked around the cave one last time, not moving an inch from where he stood before looking up. I have everything on me, yeah. This is it. Okay, first thing we need to do, get him some clothes and shoes. A tunic and being barefoot would turn heads no matter where he went. After they emerged from the cave, Zo looked over Narit and raised her eyebrow in a silent question to Phoebe which she just shrugged at. Soon they were off, Narit doing a decent job of running alongside them, even if they'd slowed their pace. They ran until Narit was visibly worn out though he didn't complain, and he did last a lot longer than they had thought he would. They had covered a decent distance, and the monsters had retreated, their instincts warning them against further aggression. Probably the handiwork of Lady Artemis. To Phoebe it brought a sense of deja vu, the last time a child could run like this was when Achilles was young back when Atalanta beat his father in a wrestling match all those years ago. Flashback end. She sighed, bringing her arm up to cover over her eyes. Evidently, he was unsure of how to interact with them at first. When they had gone about setting up camp, he had stood next to a tree and watched on, looking unsure and not knowing what to do. Opting instead to stay out of the way, not wanting to disturb them. But that quickly changed when she saw Cypriots had taken him along with her when she went patrolling. That was all she saw of him until dinner came and she saw him sat with her and Crocale. He looked more comfortable and even a little happy as they talked quietly among themselves. From what little she heard from eavesdropping, he talked about what it was like growing up and in return he asked about the hunt, them personally and of Lady Artemis. When it came to actually eating, he said something which nearly made her spit out her water. He didn't know what to do with a fork, asking why he couldn't just eat with his hands. Causing Philino, who was sat nearby, to actually choke on her food as Crocale spent the next half of an hour teaching him how to use all the cutlery. Strangely enough, it was chopsticks, the hardest cutlery to use in the world, that he seemed to know how to use instantly. Chopsticks. Even she wasn't as good as he was, and she had been practicing ever since Apollo had come back from his trip to the Far East. How unfair was that? Turned out Narit was full of surprises. There were just some things he was so naturally good that it was almost as if he had been doing them for years. His perception and senses were incredibly sharp, noticing little details not long after they would. Whilst that on its own wouldn't be strange had they all been normal mortals, since all hunters received Artemis's blessing upon swearing the oath, it did raise a couple eyebrows. They all gained some divine powers like enhanced physicality and senses, eternal youth, the ability to talk to animals, and increased ability to use the bow and arrow from the blessing. For Narit to not be far off from them spoke volumes, not including him being untrained and young as he was. During his spars with Philino, as she taught him pancration, she said it was more like remembering something forgotten rather than learning a new skill. His weapon maintenance was top quality as well, though Zoe mentioned he said Lady Artemis had taught him the basics when she came to visit him and he had kept practicing since then. There wasn't much to improve beyond that and Zoe had instead moved him straight onto shooting where he had definitively proven he was a child of Artemis. Soon enough, Phoebe decided she ought to maybe stop avoiding Narit and pay more attention to him. Not by talking to him obviously, but by asking others who taught him of course, and maybe a little spying. She was expecting Narit to be like all other male heroes, arrogant, selfish, yada yada, the works. But she was proven wrong. In all his lesson with various hunters, from Thean foraging and camping to Cypriots and ancient Greek history. He never gave anyone any perverse looks, nor did he prove to be anything but a diligent worker. Unless it came to more academic subjects, like literature, but even she could admit it was rather dry material, and it was no surprise that he tended to get distracted or even doze off. She even saw one time, Thero had to literally tie him down to a chair in order to teach him Greek literature. Hyperactivity was a common trait among demigods due to innate battle instincts, so the lack of ability to sit still for long periods of time was a foregone conclusion. He had the basics down, and when it came to everyday conversation, he was passable-ish, but he needed to learn about poetry and more refined speech too. And as she watched, Narit had somehow managed to free himself, draw up a cartony sign to take his place, and make himself scarce by the time Thero had finished writing out a passage from a speech by Hypatia and turned around. Of course, Phoebe could have foiled his entire plan then and there, but she was curious. Plus, she wanted to get back at Thero for sneaking that ghost pepper into her sandwich that one time, and the gobsmacked look of her face was a price well worth her silence. She nearly broke into fits of laughter at the vein that threatened to pop on Thero's forehead as she swore to herself in Greek, fitting considering the lesson, and ran off to chase her wayward student. Only just managing to contain herself when she had glared daggers at her, but bursting into laughter as soon as she was out of sight and well within hearing range. It didn't take too long before Thero had returned, holding Narit by the scruff of his shirt as she plopped him down and continued the lesson. The stink eye she gave him pinned him to his seat as he suffered in silence. But by then Phoebe had left, having been called away to hunt some game for dinner. She even decided to sit in on one of his more practical lessons to see if what Philino and Zoe had said was true. It wasn't like she seriously thought they lied to her, but she had a hard time believing anyone, let alone a male, could receive such high praise from not only the lieutenant of the hunt but also their most adept CQB expert. Her disbelief in his combat prowess was soundly proven wrong however, his joint manipulation and technique was more like watching a machine, it was equivalent to someone who had spent years perfecting their art, no wasted movement. At first, he was alright, nothing exceptional for a kid, but as the lessons went on and his experience grew, it was phenomenal. The sheer precision he commanded was almost unreal for one so young, it was like watching a fish discover water for the first time. Clumsy at first but the rate at which he learned was almost inhumane, she could see why Philino had said it was more like he was relearning something forgotten, rather than learning something new. Blocks or parries were done decently but constant on-the-fly corrections, distributing the hit over a larger surface area or counter-blocking with hard joints. One movement flowing to the other, punches and kicks sharp and deliberate. shifting from attack to defense to counterattack like a river flowing over rocks, never staying in one place. Even if the hunter he was sparing was physically stronger than him, he was fighting in such a way to minimize their strength advantage as best he could. Much as she wasn't one to compliment a male, even she had to admit he was a hard worker. Whenever she woke up, he was always just coming back from wherever he went off to in the morning. Curious as to where he went off to, she followed him once and watched as he practiced CQB drills in a clearing. A genius of hard work if she ever saw one. His defense was smooth, as young and small as he was, he just couldn't take a hit and walk it off. So, he never did, instead deflecting or dodging to put him in a better position or to allow for swift retribution. At first, whoever he was fighting would go quite slowly, so as to teach him and just faster than he was to push his limits. He still lost all his fights, understandable since everyone was centuries older and with just as much experience in live combat. But as he fought more and more, he showed himself to be a true prodigy just like Philino had said. As woe as Phoebe was to admit it, he had the potential to become one of their strongest fighters. The journey of 100 miles starts with one step and Narit was running. She kept her promise to Fael. Just yesterday she had told him she would be teaching him how to use one of their iconic weapons, the hunting knife, today. She held her knife up, her reflection stared back at her, the blade clean and well taken care of, but bore the signs of long use. She wasn't the best with it per se, but she was good, second only to Philino, and it was only a tiny difference. If I was taught in Sparta, I reckon I could beat her. Benefits of top quality training I suppose. Right, enough procrastinating, got a busy day today. She twirled her knife around a couple times to warm up her hands before getting up. Once outside, she saw Narit was just starting his breakfast, a couple fruits and some smoked meats from the jackalope last night. As she had instructed, he had left his bow back in his personal tent, no one was comfortable enough to share a tent with him, and it was an unspoken thing that he would have his own. He only brought his hunting knife with him which sat in its sheath in front of him. She grabbed her breakfast before sitting opposite of him. Morning. He hurriedly swallowed his mouthful of orange before responding, morning, Phoebe. As I said yesterday, I'll be teaching you how to properly use the hunting knife. She said, unsheathing her own. Before we get on to the doing stuff, there's a bit of theory to know before we start. Narit nodded, completely focused on her words which encouraged her to keep going. Dexterity is an important part of using the hunting knife. There's two ways to hold it, blade up in the direction of your thumb and blade down in the opposite direction. Showing him the different holds as she showed him. A faint smile gracing her lips as he mimicked her actions. Maybe this won't be so bad. Her mind's eye projected the image of Hippolytus, frown on his face, tongue sticking out as he attempted to spin his knife centuries ago, failing and cutting himself as she laughed at his attempts. She still remembered when he had run up to her before dinner, smile threatening to split his face when he finally got the dexterity exercise. Each has their advantages and disadvantages, but we'll talk about that later. For now, while you eat, I want you to practice this exercise with your dominant hand. She showed him the step-by-step of how to spin the blade between his fingers before showing it slowly and later as she normally did. It would improve his dexterity, then she showed him how to switch from one hold to another in the same way. Give it a try. Phoebe munched on her apple as she watched him have at it. Caught up in her reminiscing and planning for the rest of the lesson, she realized belatedly not even 5 minutes later he was doing it perfectly. She supposed it really shouldn't have surprised her this much, but he got it down to a T before he'd even started on his third orange. Our orange is his favorite thing. And it didn't take him much longer to get it down on his non-dominant hand either. Philino was not kidding, he's got it like he's done it for his entire life. Like the knife is an extension of him. The rest of breakfast consisted of her explaining the different uses, pros and cons, things to be aware of, how the sort of things he would need to be careful of when using it. When she just got onto how the hunting knife fared against other weapons, he asked, are we only allowed to use a hunting knife? Like, what happens if we get attacked by something that uses weapons, like a spear? Or if we need something with more reach? Phoebe looked at him strangely for a minute before it clicked in her head, you've never seen any of us sparring, have you? She didn't realize it, but she was quickly becoming more and more comfortable talking to him. Maybe it was the resemblance he had with Lady Artemis, or maybe it was because she was so used to tutoring others and it was familiar territory. Whatever the case, she didn't feel any discomfort or intolerance towards him as the lesson went on. When he shook his head, she nodded in understanding. Then I can see where you're coming from. But long and short of it is no, we can use whatever weapon we want to. On top of the bow and hunting knife, Scathach uses a spear, Bradamante a lance, Philino's Ifos and Hoplon, and pretty much all of us are trained in using some other weapon. It's just rare that we have to use it while we're on a hunt. Sometimes we'll use bladed weapons, but the majority of the time our bows are enough to kill monsters. Although, we do use our own weapons quite frequently during Capture the Flag at Camp Half-Blood. When they'd both finished eating, they spent the rest of the morning sparring. With each spar, Phoebe would use different moves to highlight an error-specific technique to teach him. As the sun climbed higher, hunters who left earlier started to trickle into camp, finishing whatever they were doing. Phoebe was a lot more comfortable than she thought she could ever be with a male. Not once did Narit do anything remotely perverse, and he had such an honest hard-working give-it-your-all attitude that she knew pretty quickly he wasn't the sort to go back on his word or break his promises. She was breathing slightly harder than when they had started, but Narit was openly panting, shoulders hunched forward, a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. He tied his hair back to keep it out of his face when Phoebe had used it as leverage to force him into a knife hold. That thoroughly unpleasant yanking of his scalp was lesson learned, and he wouldn't have his hair loose again in a fight ever again if he could help it. Strangely enough, he didn't complain about having long hair in the first place, and Phoebe didn't push it, wasn't her business how he decided to have his hair. Zoe had just exited Lady Artemis's tent when she saw something which she thought would take the fates directly intervening before it happened. Phoebe was talking, and by the looks of it quite happily, with a boy. Whether Phoebe knew it or not, she had a small smile of her face as she shared anecdotes to Narit about the uses of the hunting knife and the many times her life had been saved by it. During dinner, Zoe was once again sat by Phoebe, but this time they were alone. The cheerful and companionable atmosphere of dinner permeated the camp, the hearth at the center glowed brightly, unseen to all was a little girl with a simple brown cloak who eased her way gracefully past everyone unseen. Settling herself down to gently tend the fire with a poker, nodding to Artemis, a serene smile on her face as she enjoyed the atmosphere and studied her grandnephew. "Had excitement the present day, didn't we?" Zoe said with a knowing smile as she nudged Phoebe. "What makes you say that?" "I did see this morning, passed by thy lesson on mine own way back from patrol." The smile turning into a grin as Phoebe's cheeks turned slightly pink. "Yeah, alright, whatever, he's got talent like you said," Phoebe admitted, huffily biting into her bread. "Not just yawned, they know it yourself. Narit's different." "Fine, okay, I was wrong," Phoebe conceded with a sigh, "he's a good kid. Let's hope he stays that way, but with the way Crocodile is acting I doubt he'll go astray. Plus, there's all of us. Narit did learn all the basics that he'll need at F''r hunteth, they knoweth what that means." Phoebe nodded. It was one of the things some of the hunters had requested, and Lady Artemis agreed to readily, eagerly if anything. Narit would have to go through an initiation before he could officially join the hunt. The first part was done with, he had spent a year living with them, and not once did he do anything which was unacceptable, now came the second part. This was what had Phoebe slightly worried. A solo hunt, whilst it would have been a rather trivial affair for any of them, Artemis herself had chosen his challenge, and she was basing it rather loosely on something Orion had done back when he was a hunter to appease some of the more doubtful hunters. Even Lady Artemis's competitive spirit, needless to say, Narit being the ripe old age of 7, caused Phoebe to have some reason to worry about his chances of success. Zoe must have felt how uneasy Phoebe was at the prospect, and a sympathetic smile crossed her features. "Narit shall beast fine, we has teach the him everything he shall needeth to succeed, and he has excelled. Were I not?" she reassured as she patted Phoebe on the shoulder. Phoebe kept her head slightly bowed, head titling slightly to look at Narit as he laughed at Thero's usual antics. "Your English has certainly improved," she noted slyly, laughing even as she was shoved and Zoe's cry of indignation. "But yeah," she mumbled, "he'll be fine. He'd better be," she was just starting to become fond the little squirt. Chapter 4. Somewhere in Yellowstone Mountain. What a year it's been. Narit thought with a sigh. His life before leaving the forest had been simple. Learn, play, sleep. Rinse and repeat. He loved it, but there wasn't much else beyond that. Even after Artemis had come to visit him and he spent hours every day practicing archery, it still was pretty similar. No other people, no new places to see. By the time he was 5 he could basically run all around a forest that stretched for ages and ages as he pleased, but even then it was still just a forest. There were only so many times one could see the same trees and bushes before it stopped being interesting. From traveling with the hunters for the past year, he got to see and experience so much already. This wouldn't happen too often, more often than not he would be too busy to take advantage of it. But sometimes they would set up camp near Esha town, and when he occasionally had the free time, he would go with them and get the chance to look around. Granted, he had to wear the same gear as the rest of them, including those stuffy boots he hated, and he had to keep his hood on the entire time, which made it hard to see everything properly. But even then, it still let him get a good look around. Learning how humans live together in buildings with so many others in such a small space. The economy was something he had trouble wrapping his head around. How could someone sell one person one thing, get some paper, and give it to someone else for something entirely different? It made no sense to him. What's to stop people from making more the paper money? Large buildings, with tall columns and the way the statues were carved into the stonework of the building, made some of them look intimidating. Skilled masonry though. As much as he would have liked to explore more, he hardly had the spare time anyways. Spending pretty much every single day learning something new or practicing what he learned. Tired day in day out, training from dawn till dusk one thing or another. The hunters hadn't been on any major hunts either, just killing whatever monsters were nearby or could possibly threaten them. Crocale had said that was because of him. Not in a bad way, she assured. But during a major hunt they would be moving camp sporadically, constantly on the move to chase their prey. Although occasionally they would do a contract every now and then. As much as he wanted to join in, he was strictly told to watch and learn. With 20 members they could still do a fair bit, but they would have to be single target, quick search and destroy hunts, lest his own training be postponed from the constant moving. More challenging monsters like the Chimera or the Nemean lion were challenging targets that the entire hunt should be allowed to take part in. Some of them could take years to reform after all. But things were going to change soon, very soon. Normally whilst he was training, he would have a hunter with him. But for the past month and a bit, he was exclusively trained by Artemis herself, and that escalation in intensity had really knocked him flat some days. She was now in her 16-year-old form, the average age of her hunters appearance-wise, but she still had a powerful aura around her, as everyone bowed to her. "Rise, my hunters." She swept her gaze over the group before her gaze settled on Narit's. Identical yellowy silver eyes stared back at each other before she smiled. "Narit," he stepped forward, keeping his back straight. He knew exactly what was going to happen. A week after he joined, Artemis had called him in for a meeting. Flashback. Narit had just finished hanging out some meats to be smoked with Crocale when he was told Artemis called for him. Surprised, he hurriedly finished what he was doing and made his way to her tent. Standing outside, he wiped his palms on his trousers. It must have been silly to be nervous to talk to his own mother, but he couldn't help it, he hadn't talked to her that many times since he joined. She must have her reasons, but even then, he couldn't help but feel a little let down. One of the big reasons he wanted to join the hunt was because of her. She was family, and he thought she had wanted him to join, but pretty much as soon as he did, she was about to leave. Talk about mixed signals. Inside the tent was homey, the hearth dug into the center was warm and danced as light flickered on the walls. Innumerable pelts hung on the walls, both mortal and immortal, from all around the world. Gleaming white pelt of a polar bear to scales the size of dinner plates of what must have been a gargantuan reptile. Artemis knelt by the fire, cleaning her signature bow with practiced ease, deft hands belying her experience. The flickering light of the hearth danced in her eyes as she smiled at him, gesturing for him to take a seat. He was a little lost for words, so it was Artemis who spoke first. "What do you think of the hunt so far, my child?" "It's been good, Lady Artemis. It's not been long, but I've already learned a lot, been really busy I guess," he said, scratching the back of his head. "Sometimes it feels a bit much, but it's okay so far." Artemis nodded in understanding. Many others felt the same way when they start. "My hunters are among the elites. We take training very seriously for it separates mediocrity from excellence," she said with obvious pride in her voice. "However, from what I've heard, you've shown remarkable talent in your studies so far, as expected of my child." Narit blushed at the praise, unused to it as he was. "I know how you must feel, me departing so soon after you joined. But I am needed at Olympus. Zeus he has become quite worried, rightly so I feel, with all that has been happening in the mortal world. Events are brewing, monsters are stirring, things can get out of hand fast if not handled properly." Not knowing what she was talking about, he waited for her to continue. "In any event, I am unsure how long this winter solstice will take. Zoe is to lead while I am gone. When I return, I shall evaluate your progress regularly and decide when you shall have your final test. Your initiation, to see how well you have learned your lessons. Continue to work hard and train, do not be arrogant," she warned. "Hubris is the deadliest of fatal flaws. It has and will continue to be the downfall of many heroes." He nodded, her dire warning a somber reminder that what he learned wasn't fun and games, but instead lessons on staying alive in a world where monsters outnumbered demigods hundreds to one. She reached to her side and patted his head comfortingly. "Worry not, my son, the others will see you for who you are soon enough. Just continue to face them in good faith. They will come around eventually." Flashback end. It has been a year since you first started learning the ways of the hunt, and now it has come the time to test how well you have learned your lessons. You shall embark on a hunt of your own. Follow this river upstream due north and you shall arrive at a forest. It is there you shall begin your hunt. There is a pack of hellhounds which you shall slay, bring their fangs here, you have a week. Remember all you have learned, may the moon light your path." Narit bowed before going to his tent to gather his things. Zoe, meanwhile, approached Artemis. "M'lady, I wanteth not to beast presumptuous, but is Narit able to accomplish it such a hunteth on his own? He is only 7. I knoweth." As Zoe raised her concerns with Artemis, Narit was already back at his tent looking over his stuff. Laying it all out on his bed, his bow and a quiver full of arrows were present, alongside a wrapped package of smoked meats tied together with string, his hunting knife, as well as some spare supplies like bandages and strings. No matter how he looked at it, he always felt like he should have more knives, one didn't seem like enough. He was a little nervous. Hellhounds were one of the more common monsters demigods faced, but they were still dangerous and could become one of the deadliest if left unchecked. Starting off at the size of a large mastiff, they grew rapidly, so most were the size of a grizzly bear, but as they got older, they could be as tall as 2 meters or even larger. The older ones had the ability to travel in the shadows like the children of Hades, becoming stronger and more aggressive at night. What a troublesome opponent, it stood as a wonderful counter to the heightened senses he got when the moon was out. Once he finished strapping everything on, he tucked his pendant into his shirt and headed out. Somewhere in Yellowstone Mountain several days later. Wind whipped past him, his legs pumping like a well-oiled machine as they worked hard to propel him further, faster, quicker. Despite the pace and urgency with which he ran, he kept his breathing steady as he could, that is. Sweat trickled down his neck, the cool night air made the trail left behind tingle. Despite his fear, he kept a clear head. He knew if he didn't, it would find him. And it would kill him. It was a dark night, a new moon. Even without the natural light to guide his way, he still managed to keep his footing. He kept his eyes wide open, constantly scanning his surroundings, his awareness sharp, to watch out for his quarry. The stars did their best to provide what little clarity they could. He zigzagged and doubled back to leave false tracks. No matter what he did, it would always see through it, eventually finding its way back on his tail. He didn't know how it was doing it, the longest he had managed to evade it was an hour, and that was nowhere near enough time to get back to the others. He was starting to run out of options, no one could keep running forever, and he was no exception. His legs were starting to burn, his eyes felt sore. He slowed down, signs of fatigue starting to show themselves, and still he made no sound. His footfalls remained silent. Movement so deeply ingrained from hours of repeated practice it was almost second nature. He came across a fairly deep river which led further downstream. The stones at the banks of the river were slick with water as the water lazily swept past, carried along by the current. He dashed across, making sure to not touch the water and leaving more obvious and heavy footprints on the opposite bank. As soon as he reached the foliage on the other side, he doubled back, making sure to step only where he had previously and slid into the water soundlessly. Hiding behind a half-submerged boulder, he waited. The cool water felt heavenly on his burning legs, but it was numbing his fingers and made his breath hitch as the cold bit into his torso. His clothes were magically reinforced, no amount of water could get through it, but it wasn't airtight. Water slipped through the cracks and the large tears in his side. He could feel his heart hammering away, thumping so loudly in his ears he was worried it would hear him. Hopefully the water would muffle anything it could hear from him. In the otherwise silent night, a slithering sound rasped out, making his hairs stand on end. Come out wherever you are, little demigod. I grow weary of this foolish chase." A gentle, motherly voice spoke, clear as day. How she managed to speak with teeth like she did creeped Narit out on so many levels. Sweet and soft as a lullaby, the perfect voice to soothe and comfort a child. All the more ironic considering her crimes. The foul sour smell pervaded his nose, but he kept his breathing steady and silent, unwilling to move an inch. A shadow passed over him, she must be using the boulder as a perch. The blurry shadow on the river outlined her monstrous figure. Human from the waist up, a monster serpent downed, easily 10 meters long. A tongue darted out, thin and forked as it flicked around to taste the air around it. Seeking its prey, seeking him. The frustrated hiss showed his brief success at evasion as she moved swiftly away, but she would be back. She could track him no matter where he went, and he was running out of options. Day 1 of initiation. Narit had set out as soon as he gathered everything he would need. He knew his initiation would be tough, but he believed in himself and in the lessons he learned. He spent the rest of the day just getting to the forest where he would start his hunt. He woke early, looking through the forest in the hopes of running across some tracks he could use or evidence of hellhound activity. It was hardly a good way to track, but he didn't have anything else. His nose was nowhere near as sensitive as the wolves', so he couldn't just sniff them out. Hellhounds tended to be less active during the day too, so listening for ongoing activity was also out of the equation. There was a chance they would be attracted to him since he was a demigod, but sitting around all day was hardly a good use of time. He ran slowly, eyes darting about as he took in every little detail around him to try and find his targets. With the sun at its highest point, he decided to climb a tree and catch a couple hours of sleep. Hopefully he would have more luck at night. The sun soon finished its descent as dusk took hold. Narit blinked away sleep before he checked his surroundings. He wasn't tired, a couple hours of sleep were all he needed to rest, and he was off again. He stumbled across a clearing with all the hallmarks of a messy kill. Blood splattered the floor, staining the grass dark red as the dried blood soaked into the ground like a macabre fertilizer. There were splotches here and there, huffed footprints jumbled about alongside torn-up patches of grass, painted a picture of a struggle to him. Shreds of fur littered the ground in patches, no doubt from where the hellhounds had torn their prey to shreds. Flattened grass heading east alongside blood marks meant they must have dragged their prey elsewhere. Alongside the flattened grass he saw the paw prints. The largest ones were the size of his head, probably the alpha. Gouges in the ground, undoubtedly dug by long dagger-like claws able to eviscerate prey with ease. Smaller and the varied sizes of the tracks nearby all heading in the same direction indicated the hellhound had at least 2 pack members, possibly more. Some paw prints were more defined, the 4 leading toes, and in some of the cases a 5th toe pointing the opposite direction, could also be seen. No doubts here, this was definitely made by a pack of hellhounds. No local canines are large enough to have made these tracks. He followed the tracks for as long as he could, eventually finding the carcass they left behind. The bones stood out stark white against the rotting flesh and clotted blood. The ribsage pointed upwards like demented teeth looking to take a bite out of anything that came near. Flies buzzed about as they feasted of the scraps left behind. Narit covered his nose, wrinkling it in distaste. What a waste, the fur and horns could have been used had the hunters killed it instead. Glassy eyes stared back at him as he looked around to try and find signs of where the pack had headed off to next. After some searching around, he eventually found something useful that pointed him due northeast. Taking off once again in pursuit, he ran through the night. Despite the lack of moonlight, he still found that he was able to clearly make out the forest floor. Day 2 of initiation. It took another day of searching before he caught the most recent signs of the hellhounds. This time the blood was fresh, not having had time to dry. They must have killed this today. He placed his hand atop one of the tracks before sniffing the tracks. Scents were normally near impossible for a human to detect, and only those with years of training were able to pick up anything left from more than a day. Narit, with his enhanced smell, was much more capable. He unslung his bow from his back as he notched an arrow, not drawing the arrow back as he silently ran after his quarry. A deep throaty growl came up ahead, keeping in mind to stay low to the ground to stay hidden, he crept forward to get a better view. And Crocale complains about my table manners, she should look at his. He thought, watching the 2-meter-tall hellhound take a chomp out of the bison. Ribs and meat all being pulverized as it was crushed between those powerful jaws, the smaller hellhounds were little better. Tearing into the carcass with rabid enthusiasm as they jostled for the best parts. Little was left when they had finished their meal and moved on. He remembered his history lessons from Cypriots, much as he disliked studying. Divide and conquer. If you are fighting a numerically superior foe you have 2 options. One is to do what Hannibal did at Cannae and envelope your enemies, steady center and strong flanking attacks. The other is to do what Fabian did, which is the tacticus hunters normally use. Loath as I am to use men as examples, Cypriot sighed, but their stratagems are what we care about, not the men. Hannibal was little better than a brute driven solely by his revenge fantasy, whilst Fabian was arrogant to Tartarus and back with a superiority complex, rivaling that of Lord Zeus. He continued to stalk the hellhounds. From what I remember from my mythos lessons, aren't hellhounds meant to be more solo hunters? I'm pretty sure they rarely form large packs for long, or was it the Cyclopses that did that? I'll wing it. What's the worst that can happen? Narit must have had the devil's luck because not even an hour later he found himself looking down at the pack as they padded at the bottom of a pretty barren valley. He couldn't ask for a more perfect ambush spot. He stealthily jumped down to a slab of rock that jutted out the side as he drew his bow and aimed. Flashback. I know if Lady Artemis has already gone over how to shoot with Beffer. But I doubt if Mlady did manage to teach us everything in a single evening. Zoe said as she walked away from camp, Narit in tow. Yeah, we didn't have a load of time really. Spent a lot of time trying to string the bow in the first place. But we did practice shooting standing targets and I practiced on my own a lot too. Narit replied. Stringing a bow on its own was hard, with a reflex bow like his it was a nightmare. Unstrung, a reflex bow would look nothing like a bow at all, if anything it looked more like a wheel which children would hit with a stick to make it roll around. Narit could do the knot tying just fine, but when it came to bending the bow backwards to tie the other end it was absolutely horrendous. He managed it, eventually, somehow, after a struggle which lasted an eternity. Here we are. Narit looked around. They were in a less dense area of forestry with nothing particularly noteworthy around. I wanteth thee to shooteth at whatever I shooteth at. As near as thee can manage. When Narit nodded she conjured up her bow, something he learned all hunters could do, and shot at a tree trunk not too far away. Narit unslung his bow from his back and fired, learning that little magic would be so useful. His arrow landing within a foot of where Zoe's arrow stuck out. They repeated this several times throughout. Zoe was analyzing Narit's entire process from stance, notching, drawing and aiming to firing. There really wasn't much to correct really, except a couple minor habits he picked up from practicing on his own. He lacked the strength to shoot as far as she could, obvious with the age difference. But it also meant his shots didn't have the punching power necessary for more powerful or armored monsters. She did this a couple more times to get a better feel of his capabilities, each time shooting further and further away or shooting a narrower branch in order to test his accuracy. First thing, they gripeth that bow too tight. A relaxed gripeth is what they wanteth. She showed him what she meant, at first gripping the bow far too tight with her left hand, looking like she was trying to strangle the thing, then how she held it the first time. I see, Narit said, by holding it too tightly, my arm starts to shake because my arm is working too hard. If I relaxed a bit the bow doesn't move as much. He concluded. Zoe tilted her head to the side, the hints of a smile on her lips. Exactly as thee says. Thy elbows were well positioned, simply a matter of making it second nature. We shall W''RK on shooting while running anon since thee hast standing. This a most wondrous dare, but I has to humor thee shalt exceedeth. See that squirrel, 2 o'clock, 3 meters up, 10 meters out. You hear? That is they targeteth. Remember what I have said. Narit breathed in and out to steady himself, squeezed his bow before deliberately relaxing his grip, trying to use just the right amount of strength. His right hand plucked an arrow from his quiver, smoothly notching it before he drew it back. Fingers coming to a stop just below his jaw, he could feel the bowstring at the corner of his mouth and at the bridge of his nose as the arrow rested just under his chin. He focused all his attention on the squirrel, the surroundings fading away, it wasn't moving around much. It sat on the branch munching on some seed or another. He could feel the tension in the string as he kept it drawn, the weight it put on his left arm as it worked to keep the bow where it was while his right bent the string back. The muscles in his back contracting to pull his shoulder back, this time there was no shaking. A soft breeze flitted through the air, brushing his loose hair and ticking his temple. The warmth from the sun was welcome and tingled a little on his hands, the sleeves of his shirt protected his arms from the rays of the sun. He let loose. The string he held was pulled forward by the force of the bow as the tension he held was released, transferring the energy into the arrow. Flying straight, the stiff feathers on the end of the arrow stabilized the arrow's flight by exploiting the air resistance on objects traveling at high speeds. As the arrow rapidly closed in on its target. Flash back end. The arrow struck true, straight into the base of the neck through its throat where the trachea would be, popping out the other side. And who said learning biology was useless? He snickered to himself at the irony. He hated studying. He only knew what that was because of biology lessons hammered into his head, let's just say he wasn't the most studious of pupils. The only reason he had managed to learn as much as he did was because instead of just learning the boring way, they had started dissecting animals and looking at it in real life. Some people learned by doing, some by reading. Narit was firmly in the former. It didn't even get a chance to howl a warning before the fatal shot dispersed its soul as golden powder littered the floor. 1 down, 3 to go. The other 3 hellhounds noticed one of their members had died and ran. A3 and onwards of initiation. Hellhounds could run a lot faster than humans could, added on top of that the alpha might be able to shadow travel, which would further increase the distance it could cover. The hunt carried on like this for a couple of days. Narit would follow whatever trail they left behind and when an opportunity presented itself, he would take a shot. After several attempts the second hellhound finally died. The alpha must have realized it couldn't win this battle of attrition as it switched tactics and went on the attack. Narit was forced to make a quick getaway but knew they would find him soon. Hellhounds had an incredible sense of smell and excellent night vision. He managed to evade the hellhounds for another day before they caught up to him. It wasn't long before he heard the thunderous footsteps of the giant monster pounding away at the dirt as it rapidly closed the distance between them. Narit spun around and took aim, seeing the massive beast barreling straight towards him, demonic red eyes glowing in the dark, jaw hanging open as teeth the size of his hand gleamed in the faint light of the stars. He concentrated, calmly aiming before he fired. Despite the beast running in a zigzagged approach, closing the distance between them rapidly, Narit made it. The arrow struck right in the elbow of the front leg, the sudden locking up and pain of the joint as the arrow lodged itself within caused the hellhound to suddenly lose its balance as it crashed to the ground. Its momentum digging a small trench with its face. The smaller hound had no such disability and continued charging. Narit didn't have time to notch a second shot before it was upon him, so he drew his hunting knife. Sidestepping when the beast lunged at him, he struck, scoring a deep cut all along its flank as it passed by him. Tumbling to the ground as friction worked its magic to slow it down in the most painful way possible, he spun with emotion and notched an arrow, firing as soon as he had it in its sights. It convulsed once before dissipating. Turning around he looked back and saw the alpha hellhound was no longer where it was before. Instincts flared as everything within him screamed, "Look out." Ducking and rolling, he just managed to avoid death by a hair's breadth. The alpha hellhound had shadow jumped to a tree behind him and its huge jaws snapped shut where his head was a moment ago. His knife flashed out once more, slashing a deep cut right at the nose. Golden powder immediately started leaking as the hellhound flinched back. Taking out its ability to sniff him out as well as attacking a more sensitive area made the hellhound back up wearily. Narit held his bow in his left hand and his hunting knife in his right. The hellhound was crouched, hind legs ready to spring out at a moment's notice as they circled each other. Hellhounds grew larger as they got older, the size of this one meant it had lived for at least a century. But that experience had kept itself far away enough that Narit wouldn't be able to rush forward with his knife, but at the same time it was close enough it could pounce on him if he tried to put it away and draw an arrow instead. He made sure he didn't end up anywhere with a large enough shadow behind him, if he did it would be a death sentence. He made the first move. Pulling his right hand back to grab an arrow, the hellhound saw its chance and leaped forward. But Narit was prepared, him going for an arrow was a feint, instead he jumped forward flipping his knife blade up to make a slash, but missed the legs, instead only scoring a light scratch along the belly. Low to the ground he rolled under the hellhound at the apex of its jump. Thinking fast, he improvised. Quickly rising to his knees and threw his hunting knife as hard as he could at the hellhound as it was landing at its other front leg, just managing to score a gash. If only he managed to hit the leg properly like he intended, but hunting knives were not very aerodynamic, hardly designed with the intention of being thrown. Still, the glancing blow was enough to compromise the hellhound's support and it stumbled, its injured leg being forced to bear the more weight as it flinched. As fast as he could, he started shooting, 2 into the hind legs, 1 missing and hitting below the ribsage. Before he burrowed a couple more into the soft underbelly. The hellhound howled at him in agony or anger, Narit couldn't tell. Do monsters feel emotions? I know the older more humanoid ones do. He derailed his distracting thoughts as he fired another arrow which lodged itself in its gaping maw. Ending its life as it dissolved, leaving behind several large teeth. That was yesterday. The present. It had been nearly a day since Mary and Lamia had first started chasing him, the moon hung high in the sky. She must have been stalking him since at least yesterday because she showed herself just after he had killed that last hellhound. The moment she spoke to him he knew she was dangerous and bolted immediately, barely slowing down to scoop up his dagger from the mound of dissipating golden powder. He was taught intelligent monsters never showed themselves so blatantly in broad daylight. They used their intellect to ambush demigods, killing or disabling them with as little resistance as possible. That she did not was telling. It either spoke of her arrogance or her genuine belief she would win no matter what. And looking at things now, he was leaning towards the latter. He only had 9 arrows left. He used his bandages when she got a glancing scratch on his side which burnt even now. He had nothing to get the poison out with except maybe cutting himself to bleed it out, but the chase meant time was a precious commodity he could ill afford to spend sitting still. Plus, as unpleasant as draining the blood was, it would also be like lighting a sign saying here I am. Come eat me. From the smell and obvious trail it would leave. He put a hand to his forehead, fever's gotten worse, mouths dry, he felt so hot, so heavy, his eyes started to sting from merely keeping them open. Every now and then his vision would blur slightly, but he had to keep running or else she would catch him. The clothes he wore were specially made for the hunters, it helped regulate their temperature, and things like water and blood would slide off without leaving a stain or staying wet. It even acted as a sort of flexible armor, working off much the same principle as linothorax. Layers of linen stuck together provided good protection whilst keeping agility and maneuverability. Despite that, one good hit from Mary and Lamia had managed to tear through all that and score a deep gash in his side. With her now going due west, he figured he had a bit of time and he slowly slipped out of the cold waters shivering as he slowly made his way due southeast. Anywhere to get away from her, I have to get back to the others, he panted softly, he had the teeth of the hellhounds as proof of completion. A small rasp behind him was the only warning he got. Twisting, he used his bow to deflect the claws as he ducked into a roll, water splashing around him. Feeling his razor-sharp claws sliced a couple strands of his hair, her strength being enough to push past his rushed block. Springing forward under her arm, he twisted around to fire a shot at Lamia's exposed back, but she swayed and sunk back into the trees for cover, circling him like a shark as he ran. Appearing briefly, teasingly. Slinking in and out of the shadows as he slowly spent more and more of his limited arrows just to keep her at bay. Ooh oh, little hunter has some moves, how dreadfully scary. Lamia swooned, that same gentle voice filled with mockery, now carried hints of amusement as she emerged fully. His last arrow still in his quiver as he held his knife up defensively. Why don't we end this little game? I can see it now, she hissed, her voice seeming to resonate in his mind. My poison has already worked its magic. You can barely keep your eyes open. She cackled. Narit narrowed his eyes, sweat trickling down his brow, he couldn't afford to blink, much as he wanted to. Slowly inching away. He was down to his last arrow. He couldn't afford to waste it on anything but a kill shot, as she had proven to be able to dodge everything he fired from this distance. But he had to use the others just to keep her away from him, it was probably why he was still alive and not torn to shreds already. His vision blurred, his head tilted to the side as his sense of balance was messed up. He had no idea whatever Lamia did next. He didn't even realize he had closed his eyes, but when he opened them, he felt fine, none of the ache from hunting for the past couple days non-stop. None of the effects of the poison, no headache, no fever, no burning in his side, no heaviness weighing him down. Something was wrong. He was in blackness, complete and utter darkness. Nothing. He looked around, nothing. Nothing for as far as the eye could see except empty blackness. Such a sad little life you have. Lamia's voice crooned from all around him, from right by his ear, from inside his head. Firstborn son of Artemis, oh how I pity you. Who says I'm the son of Artemis? And what's so sad about that? He challenged, but even to him that sounded weak. Turning this way and that to try and find something in the blackness, auburn hair whipping back and forth. Lamia laughed uproariously, ha ha ha, you must take me for a fool. You might be able to hide yourself from others but to me, it's as clear as day. Or moon, in this case. He could hear the smirk in her voice. Do you not know anything, little child? I'm rather insulted they don't teach you proper history. Or maybe they're just so embarrassed by their complete and utter failure. Her voice rising, leaving a ringing in his ears. Those gods, she spat, can't stand the thought of a mere mortal like me getting the last laugh. Covering up their failures and hoping no one notices. Wouldn't be the first time now, would it? The sheer hate and balefulness he could feel from her voice made him uneasy. Where am I? What is this place? He froze. He couldn't move, it was like his entire body was anchored in place as he felt her fingers walking along his shoulder up his neck. Now, imagine my surprise when I'm minding my own business and something new stirs, something I nor anyone thought we would bear witness to, and yet here we are. She purred, sending shivers up his spine. Her hand entered his field of vision, he could see the clawed hands and scales inches from him as they caressed his jaw, the darkness obscured everything beyond the wrist. The claws applying just the right amount of pressure to not break his skin. A finger delicately hooked onto his necklace pulling it out. A child of Artemis, as the crescent moon pendant hung in midair, surely a sight worth seeing myself. She whispered huskily. He yearned to get away, but something kept him paralyzed, frozen in place. As he stared into the abyss stared back at him as her serpentine visage appeared before him. How could you tell? He asked, whatever seemed to be keeping him frozen didn't seem to be holding him from speaking. Monsters can't tell who the godly paw backhand slammed into his face, making his head swim and stars dance, head snapping back from the blow. His neck felt like something had broken. Monster. You dare. Your death shall be slow, you worthless cretin. By the time I'm done with you, you will beg for death. She seethed, madness dancing in her eyes, ugly sneer made all the more demonic by the reptilian pupils and the elongated fangs. Just as suddenly as the madness came, she calmed down. Godly parent, you don't know, do you? At his silence she burst out in laughter. Ah, ignorance truly is a bliss. She simpered, once she managed to control her laughter. Well, I suppose I should not be surprised. The gods hardly want their children to know they are the reason they are all hunted now, would they? They don't teach you that, Well, what? Narit didn't really understand what she was saying. He knew monsters were attracted to demigods, he just figured it was because of the godly part of them, which granted them their limited authority over or multiple domains of their parent. It's what allowed Poseidon's children to talk to sea life, Zeus's children the ability to summon lightning or fly, Hephaestus's children to be great mechanics and control fire and all that. A vicious vindicative smile crossed Lamia's face as she reveled in his fumbling in the dark. Now that can't be true, can it? Even back in the ancient days when heroes, she said, her face contorting like the word left a bad aftertaste in her mouth, like Perseus, Jason, or even Heracles walked the earth, they had to seek out the monsters they would become famed for slaying, wouldn't they? The monsters didn't just run at them in a crazed frenzy like they do now, Narit frowned, she was right. What she's saying makes sense, Perseus had to fly around on Pegasus to find the chimera before he could slay it. And the Stymphalian birds were terrorizing a town of normal mortal people who couldn't kill them, so Heracles, a demigod, had to deliberately go there and kill them. But why did monsters change from hunting whatever was around them to only attacking demigods? Yes, she hissed in satisfaction as she looked him right in the eye, so close their noses were nearly touching, looking right into his soul, something changed. Something or someone caused monsters to ignore mortals and only hunt demigods. She chuckled in glee. You. That's right. My greatest masterpiece. Circe herself couldn't have done what I did. She gloated, the mist is a tricky thing to manipulate, to bend, to master. She whispered, I could teach you. The fog around him thickened, swirling around them like a brewing storm. Where before all he could see was blackness, now all he could see was Marion Lamia as she was before Hera turned her into a monster, and the mist she controlled like it was an extension of herself. All you would have to do is swear fealty to me. She smiled maliciously. Oh, what sweet revenge that would be, the first and only son of Artemis abandoning her. Serves her right for hunting me for millennia. Why would I ever want to go with you? He shot back, you're the reason demigods are hunted. You're the reason so many people die every day. Lamia smirked, oh, am I now? Tell me, child, what do you think would happen if the monsters all across the world suddenly went back to the way they used to be? How would the mortals react when the precious reality they hold oh so dear melts away? They would panic. A voice whispered in his mind, he wasn't sure if it was his or Marion Lamia's at this point. Monsters suddenly appearing everywhere, living among them, hunting them, they wouldn't be able to fight back. Only weapons made from heavenly metal like celestial bronze or the hunter's silver can hurt them. That's right. She replied, almost as if she knew exactly what was going on in his head. The mortals would be completely overrun, millions would die on the first day, and tens of millions more after that. All they could do is run and hope some demigod, she spat, is nearby to protect them. What I did saved the mortals. Allowed them to grow and build their civilization into what it is today. Look at the gods. She commanded, her right arm flung out to gesture behind her, and the mist obeyed. A monolith rose up from where it carpeted the ground, its surface contorting before images could be made out. Blurry at first but clearing up until it was like he was seeing it in real life. The beautiful woman was sitting on a crowded street, her hands working nimbly on a large contraption to weave an intricate and stunning tapestry. Arachne was minding her own business when Athena decided she needed to put down an upstart mortal and remind her of her place. Turning her into a monster as punishment. Your precious mother sent the Caledonian boar after the entirety of Caledon because the king of Aetolia didn't bend over backwards for her. The images shifted as they depicted scene after scene of towns left devastated, hundreds left homeless, children orphaned. Zeus is the worst womanizer to ever exist. Raping one woman after another. Don't even get me started on Hera. She snarled, teeth bared, nearly frothing at the lips. The images rapidly changed, showing images one after another of the consequences of the gods meddling in mortal affairs. She can't even keep her own husband from being unfaithful. She drove Heracles into a madness so that he would kill his own wife and children. She turned me into this because I caught Zeus's eye. She took my children away from me. She screamed, panting from the rage that coursed through her veins. Compared to them, I am the lesser of two evils. She said icily, look at those girls running around playing protector. The hunters of Artemis, your own mother's handmaidens, tell me, what were they like to you, an innocent child? Raised all alone in the forest, isolated from other people, kept apart from them like some sort of disgrace. Like she could barely look at you. Narit's eyes dimmed a little, the mist around him swirled faster and faster around him. Tendrils drifting, somehow lifting him up, he came face to face with Lamia, his body limp, as she stroked his face. That's right, they didn't welcome you, didn't they? They thought you were going to betray them, always watching you, never letting you out of their sight. How could they think such a sweet child could hurt them? She crooned softly. Narit felt drowsy, like a thick blanket was smothering his thoughts. He could hardly think straight, nothing made sense anymore. He couldn't tell up from down, left to right, everything felt so strange, undefined. Nothing seemed solid, felt real, nothing except Lamia's voice. So soft, so welcoming. Suddenly he was back on the ground, surrounded, tall dark shadows, people, on all sides. Their faces showed nothing but absolute hatred and disgust to him, sneers, grimaces, looks of fear, anger, curses came at him from all sides. Smaller shadows, children, joined in. Their faces, mirror images of those of their parents, all with cruel cold eyes. Monster. Get away from it. Murderer. Why don't you just die already? Don't go near it, it might hurt you. Why would we want to play with a monster like you? Run away. Why do they allow it to walk around like that? Why can't they think about how we feel? No one wants you here. Stop it. Please, I didn't do anything. I didn't kill anyone. It wasn't my fault. Stop hurting me, stop hurting me, stop it, stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. He collapsed to his knees, turning his back, covering his ears to try and block out their voices, but hearing them all the same. He could feel his hair was shorter than it had been before, spiky and uneven in length. Feeling the cold stares, hearing the mean words, smothered in isolation. He felt a warm weight on his back, shielding him from the onslaught of abuse. That's right, they don't want you. They don't trust you. They will never trust you. You will forever be an outcast, never one of them. Lamia whispered into his ear, her voice so full of sadness and sympathy. But I do. I want you with me. I will protect you. I will teach you everything I know. I can see your potential, not like the others who only see a monster. She whispered sweet nothings. Her breath warm as it tickled his ear. I will trust you. I will stay by your side forever. All you have to do is swear fealty to me. All you have to do is be mine. Narit looked up at her, blank cloudy blue eyes glassy with unshed tears. Lamia looked beautiful, long wavy black hair as dark as midnight cascaded down her back, framing a pale angelic face. High cheekbones and sharp chin with thin lips curled into a gentle smile gave her a noble feel, like royalty, like a queen, like a mother. A couple days ago. Why am I even here? Because we don't need to put up a mist barrier around the camp and everyone already had everything covered. Crocale explained ever patiently. Quite you whining Sarah. This'll be over real quick. Cypriots chirped back. DSK. You say that, Sarah muttered as they continued trailing, keeping a respectable distance as they monitored the situation. Yup, Cypriots replied, popping the Narit's a real natural. Look, he's already found the tracks the hellhounds left behind. Give him a couple days and I bet he'll have them all done, then we can all go back and celebrate a new hunter. I can't believe of all people, you would be happy to have a male join the hunt. Sarah shot back a little challengingly. You're always banging on about how much boys suck. Much as I disagree with what Sarah is saying. In all fairness, it is a rather pleasant surprise to hear such positivity about Narit coming from you Cypriots. Crocale asked, absent-mindedly ducking around a branch as they ran to keep up. PPFFFTTT. Nah, it's not like I'm against Narit joining us, no. The more the merrier I say. Just well nothing's stopping him from asking Lady Artemis to turn him into a girl. She rushed, hoping the last part would be lost in the wind as they ran. Why did I think otherwise? Really Cypriots, really? Sarah asked incredulously, grey eyebrow rising at the thought. Oh, leave me alone. Cypriots huffed, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean. Cypriots, when Lady Artemis first told us about Narit's birth. She told us she created him from her thoughts, that means she must have had a male child deliberately. Crocale emphasized the last word as she looked at Cypriots from the corner of her eye. Can't hurt to try. Cypriots shrugged her off. Besides, she smirked, he already wears his hair long enough for it to be a girl's. Don't tell me you're why he. Yesterday. Cypriots got up from petting the wolf that accompanied them smiling at Sarah smugly, well, looks like I was right. Sarah rolled her eyes from where she was sat, opting to continue sharpening her hunting knife instead of deigning Cypriots with a reply. Crocale beamed, wonderful, as expected of Narit. Right, let us. She was interrupted by the sound of Sarah gasping, her knife falling to the ground at her shock. Crocale and Cypriots both looked at Sarah in confusion, just as one of them was about to ask what happened. Sarah broke out of whatever it was and looked at them both. Something's going on with the mist. Sarah said urgently as she quickly stowed away her gear. Cypriots looked at Crocale oddly, neither of them could tell what had set Sarah off, but when she was just about to ask what was going on, she heard her wolf growl, telling her that a monster was nearby. Sarah meanwhile had finished and had her bow at the ready. I don't know for sure what's going on, but the mist is moving, a lot. I don't know any mortal alive today who can control the mist like this. Crocale brought her right hand to hold her chin, contemplating what they should do. Whatever the case, we need to get Narit and get out of here now. Whatever or whoever is causing this can't be a good thing. I doubt it's a coincidence this has happened just as Narit finished his initiation. With that they were off, running to where they knew Narit was last. By the time they got there, they found it devoid of life, the large mound of golden powder from his hunt was there, but he was absent. Crocale knelt down, examining the ground for tracks and clues as to what happened. He was here just a moment ago. But he ran, wasn't standing the entire time, he must have rolled on the ground or fallen. Trying to avoid an attack but wasn't successful, there are flecks of blood splattered onto the floor. But then the tracks just disappear. What is going on here? Crocale muttered to herself. Cypriots paced around the edge of the clearing, senses trained to look out for any signs of where Narit might have gone. Sarah stood over Crocale, deep in thought. It just didn't make any sense. 1 minute he was there, the next he's just gone. There is no way Narit grew wings and flew off, he must have left some sort of tracks behind, no matter how good you were you always left something behind. They spent the rest of the day looking high and low for any signs of where he might have gone, but found nothing. Guys, I might have something. Sarah said. She took the lead, making their way back to where he last was. Sarah? Crocale asked, her raised eyebrow conveying the rest of her question. Sarah rifled through her pack. I had something, a spell that could aha. She pulled out a sheet of paper with a symbol made up of tiny Greek words. It's a tracking spell. Let's just hope this is actually his blood. She smeared some of the blood left behind onto the sheet and started chanting in ancient Greek. Sarah watched as the symbol wobbled on the page before starting to fade. Wait, it's not fading, it's being obscured, it's the mist. Girls, it's the mist. Someone used the mist to hide Narit and themselves from us. Crocodile and Cypriots looked up in surprise. As huntresses of Artemis, they had a natural resistance to magical illusions. Adding on their vast knowledge of the world they lived in should have meant illusions caused by the mist shouldn't have affected them. They concentrated on breaking out of the illusion, a skill taught to them by Artemis herself, and suddenly the clearing around them looked completely different. The small amount of blood turned out to be just a small and isolated fraction of the bloody puddle that stood in the center. He went due north of here, some sort of large snake creature was chasing him. Crocodile muttered, clicking her teeth. Who would gain anything by isolating Narit from us during his initiation? What snake monster could be silent enough to have gone unnoticed by all three of us? No draken could be that stealthy. Sarah on the other hand, at the mention of tracks left by snakes, went stock still. Frozen like a marble statue and just as pale, her eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. Oh no, this is bad, so bad. Sarah, calm down. Tell us what is going on. Crocodile implored. The more we know the better we can prepare. She swallowed heavily, I don't know this as a certainty. But, large snake monster, strong manipulation of the mist, the only one who matches that is. Marion Lamia. Crocodile finished grimly. The present. Gods curse her. Cypriot swore. They had managed to catch up to them after following the tracks they could now see left behind. No signs yet of a fight which both relieved and worried them. It meant Marion Lamia hadn't managed to pin Narit down in a solid engagement, not since their initial meeting in the clearing that is. But it also meant Narit was running, not wanting to fight her. Granted, that was exactly what they wanted him to do, but they all knew he must be getting tired by now. A difficult solo hunt for the last several days, and what must have been a serious injury from earlier, would be a tall order for any of them. It took them well into the night to eventually catch up to them, but what they ended up running into was hardly what they wanted to see. Narit stood still, rooted to the ground as Marion Lamia gently cradled his head in her hands, her serpentine body coiled around him possessively, constricting, binding. From what they could see, Narit had his eyes closed, cuts and bruises littered his body, the bandage hastily wrapped around his side was soaked in blood. Crocodile noted how sickly pale and limp he looked compared to his usual self. She could see the veins in the side of his neck up to his cheek had a greenish tinge to them. That was bad. Poison could be dealt with either by bleeding it out or ideally having the antidote, the sooner the better. But she couldn't see a visible wound, so he must have been hurt lower down, meaning it had spread significantly. She couldn't be certain, Phoebe was a medic, not her. Marion Lamia on the other hand, was muttering in what sounded like ancient Greek with her head bowed. The mist swirled around them protectively, slightly obscuring their sight of the two of them. They instantly fired off a volley of arrows, carefully aimed to strike at Marion Lamia and chase her away, whilst ensuring they left Narit unharmed. But before the arrows found their target, they bounced off the mist barrier, clattering to the ground uselessly. Apparently the mist is strong enough to do that. Of course it can. Marion Lamia raised her head languidly, turning to face them. The arrogant smirk she had on her face goading as she waved at them from the safety of her barrier, green eyes glowing with power. DSK. Barriers can take on varying properties, they can be used to keep people out or in, hide, create illusions, etc. A strong protective barrier won't be able to hide its presence, and vice versa. Sarah said quickly. Why hasn't Narit been able to break out yet? Everyone always says he excels in his combat-oriented lessons. Cypriots asked. Crocodile frowned as she thought about it. Sarah looked at the ground and clenched her hands, learned yet? She muttered, the rest inaudible. What was that? DSK, I said it's cause he hasn't learnt yet. What do you mean, he hasn't learnt yet? Crocodile looked at Sarah, shock written all over her face. Sarah, you. It means exactly what it means. Sarah shot back, he hasn't learnt about manipulating the mist yet. Cypriots looked about to argue, but what Sarah said next silenced her. He didn't need to know. I never got around to it, I was going to teach him after he'd passed his initiation. She said so quietly they would have missed it had they not been right next to her. Sarah's entire body language was tense, her fists tight balls by her side just waiting to punch something, anything. Sarah, no one could have predicted this would happen. Crocodile's voice barely louder than a whisper yet carrying across clearly, her warm friendly voice replaced by one filled with nothing but steel, is there anything you can do? DSK. I can't guarantee pretty much anything. She sighed, she's got him under some sort of illusion, I think, probably. Marion Lamia, God's curse that child-eating monster, is also a child of Hecate like me. Except between her and that witch Circe, they're the two most powerful magic users of all of Hecate's children. Apparently Marion Lamia could hear them just fine because her shoulders shuddered with suppressed laughter as she blew them a kiss, stroking Narit's face, taunting them. Crocodile nearly growled at the action, which only served to amuse Marion Lamia more. But I might be able to do something though, hang on. Sarah said. Chanting in ancient Greek, she held up her clasped hands horizontally, brow furrowed in concentration. Small trails of the mist gathered around as she chanted, before she pulled her hands apart. A disc formed in front of them. Marion Lamia scowled at them, although she didn't move from where she was as she kept chanting. The ring expanded until it was at least a meter wide before Sarah let her arms drop. She stopped to catch her breath. That took a lot out of me. Marion Lamia's influence over the mist is so strong. Within the disc they saw a child, dressed in ragged clothes. The white was dirtied with muck and grim, a strange swirly symbol on the back. Several sizes too large, it hung from the child's body like a curtain. The startling blue eyes and blonde hair cut short, spiky and uneven, bits of dirt entangled within. It was with a shock that Crocale realized the child was Narit. "What is this?" she asked, bewildered. The shape of his face was the exact same, but the coloration was all wrong. Despite her advanced age, she knew little of the mechanics of the mist and its manipulations. Anything and everything were almost exclusively known to children of Hecate like Sarah and Marion Lamia. Them being the only ones able to gain any serious use out of it as demigods and nymphs such as herself could at most trick mortals in limited ways. "We're looking at what she's doing to Narit. She's got him trapped in an illusion, an isolated world basically, where she can do whatever she wants," Sarah grimly stated. "And the illusion." Marion Lamia felt the intrusion. How dare that upstart even attempt to use the mist against me. She fumed silently, outwardly showing nothing. The fact she was actually even remotely successful was infuriating. No matter, she and the other two could do little more than watch. She sent a mental command to the mist form she summoned previously to converge on the hunters. Satisfied that would occupy them, she turned her focus back onto the child before her. "You will never be alone again. I will always be here with you. Soon, yes, he will not last long here. In the real world." Crocale was livid. She was so angry she saw red. She couldn't remember the last time she was this angry. The helplessness she felt at the abuse being hurled at Narit and the lies Marion Lamia spoke were mixing together to create an ugly bubbling anger that only years of experience allowed her to keep at bay and under control. She watched as Sarah tried to exert some sort of control of the mist to drag Narit out of the illusion, while Cypriots kept an eye out for any monsters that may be attracted by the activity. With no water nearby and no way to generate a rainbow, iris messages weren't an option. The best she could do was send their accompanying wolf back to camp to get help. Until then, all they could do was hope Sarah managed to get through whatever Marion Lamia had put up. No one else among them was a child of Hecate, her being an Osinid, while Cypriots was a clear-sighted moral. And with no other hunters being a child of Hecate, that meant Lady Artemis was perhaps the only one who would be able to force Marion Lamia to release Narit. She could only hope help arrived soon, gritting her teeth as she watched a lone tear streak down from Narit's blank unseeing eyes, turning her attention back to their window into the illusion. A shout from Cypriots was the only warning she got before she whipped around, bow at the ready as some things marched out from the undergrowth. And the illusion. That's it, just a little more. Lamia could feel the child's mental barrier being broken down. "Why don't you just die already? Monsters like you will never be accepted by us. Stay away. You never had any parents. Monsters don't deserve anything." Her mastery over illusions were perfect. No matter their mental fortitude, she could break anyone. Everyone had skeletons in their closet, and this illusion exploited just that. It took the fears and traumatizing memories and nightmares of the target and projected them in a loop. In theory, it would keep going for as long as she wanted it to. He should have been particularly easy to bend to her will. The combination of his fears, experiences, nightmares and his young age should have meant he would become hers when she offered herself to him. But he still refused, he still hesitated. Something stopped him from giving up. She was surprised a child so young would be able to resist her magic for so long, but the chase made the prize all the sweeter. She would get what she wanted in the end anyway. What did it matter how long it took? The seething anger she could see from the hunters as they watched helplessly from outside was simply delicious icing on the cake. Oh, how she savored their anger, their rage. This child was the first and only son of their patron goddess. Oh, how it would wound them for him to abandon them, to turn him against them. "You want a family, don't you? I could be your mother. I would take good care of you. I would raise you as my own. I'll always be by your side," she said, stroking his hair as if he were her child, bringing him close to her chest and resting her cheek on his head. "They took my children away from me, it's only fair I take theirs, isn't it? Yes, I like that, don't you?" The almost feral snarl she heard from the hunter outside almost made her burst into manic laughter. Back at camp. Phoebe was anxious. It had been several days now since Narit's initiation had started and she didn't know how he was doing. Really, it should have been quite simple, just a pack of hellhounds. Nothing each of them couldn't have done on their own, but they had years of experience and could take care of themselves in a pinch. Plus, none of them were 4 feet nothing and their ages were well beyond the single digits. Sure, Narit was talented, by the gods he was talented. But he was still extraordinarily young to be out hunting monsters. It was one thing to survive as a demigod, keeping on the move was normally enough to stay ahead if they traveled on their own. But actively seeking them out was another thing entirely. She hummed to herself in thought, just coming up to camp from when she had broken off from her patrol because of the recall order. There was a surprising amount of activity at this time. Normally most would be out on their morning duties, but everyone was on their feet. Flitting about in a hurry, taking down their tents and erasing any trace of them being here. They could go from a fully established camp to ready to move out in 20 minutes. She made a beeline for Zo, who stood solemnly in the center conversing with Philino, absent-mindedly noting one of their wolves exhaustedly panting at their feet. Isn't that the wolf that went with Crocodile to monitor Narit's initiation? Hey, what's going on? Why are we breaking camp? Zo and Philino shared a look. Narit hath successfully completed his initiation. She started, her expression looked downright lethal, her grey eyes like the gathering of storm clouds. But was attacked anon after by Mary and Lamia. We leaveth immediately. And the illusion. Narit didn't understand what was going on. He couldn't remember much of anything. Where was he? What time was it? Jumbled pictures, sounds and feelings filled his head in a tangled mess, but all of them horrible, sad, scary, dark. He could hear noises. Were those voices? There was shouting, metal ringing, but that sounded muffled. Like his head was underwater. He could hear a voice, much clearer than the shouts. So soft, so gentle. It was so soothing he felt like he could fall asleep to it, but something stopped him from sleeping. Something stopped him from letting go. He wasn't sure what it was that made him turn around, but something was calling out to him. Something deep down. Something intrinsic. What he saw was the stuff of nightmares. One moment he was mesmerized by a pair of serpentine eyes, and the next he found himself looking up at the terrifying visage of a giant kitsune. Somehow, he knew it wasn't a fox. The gigantic kitsune was so tall the top half of the demonic creature was shrouded in shadows. Its body outlined by an orange haze that radiated power. Its eyes glowed a deep bloody red, rows of gleaming white razor-sharp teeth the size of trees stood out from the darkness. Behind its great body of orange fur were tails, 9 tails he saw, waving and swaying, creating a hellish visage of a blazing living inferno. Looking at such a nightmarish vision didn't fill him with fear, though, instinctively he knew the kitsune would never hurt him. It was his friend, his partner. They were a team, the ultimate tag team. The kitsune opened its mouth, and an ear-splitting roar screeched out. Blowing away the dark shadows that surrounded him, shattering the illusion. Marion Lamia was paralyzed by the sight before her and didn't have any time to react before the force of the roar blasted her back, forcefully ending her control as she snapped back to reality in a daze. Narit's mind started to clear up, but it was too slow to do anything to avoid Lamia's claw wrapping itself around his neck, strangling him. He scrabbled at her hand, trying to loosen her hold so he could get some air into his lungs. Choking, he tried to reach to his hip sheath but found it empty. His knife must have fallen when he fell under her spell. I don't know what that was, Lamia seethed, her eyes alight with anger, but you are not the first demigod to attempt to resist me, and you will not be the last. You will fall like all those before you, my magic is far too strong for the likes of you to resist forever. You will be mine. Lamia saw a flicker of movement and one of the hunters outside shouted something to the others. Much to her consternation, due to whatever happened in the illusion, it had completely shattered the mist around them. She didn't have time to create another barrier from scratch, powerful ones like that took a lot of time and preparation. Even one as great as she had to prepare this barrier in advance of the chase, carefully forcing the demigod to the prepared area. She instead planned on a tactical withdrawal. Whilst it would hurt her pride, she was hardly going to just stand here and die to these commoners. Much as it pained her to admit it, the hunters were a significant threat. Noticing Narit had stopped struggling, she thought he had passed out. But when she drew some mist-form cards to summon more help, she felt blinding pain explode from her wrist. Narit's right arm was up at eye level, silver hunting knife gleamed up mockingly at her. Before she could recover, she felt him grab her handless arm and pull himself towards her. Just before he could thrust his knife forward to skewer her heart, she flicked her wrist to summon the mist forms and wrapped her hand around his and twisted, snapping his wrist. What strong willpower, broken wrist and not a single sound, he'll be a dangerous one when he grows up. I have to have him. As focused as she was on Narit, she didn't notice the hunters outside had already finished dealing with her mistforms until they had already fired and arrows thudded along her serpentine lower half. Some ricochet off the hardened scales, but a couple found purchase in the chinks in her scaly armor, causing her to hiss in pain. She brought back her arm up to deflect an arrow and stop it from piercing her head, though several lodged themselves near her hip, drawing a hiss of pain. More demigods she had previously abducted emerged from their mist cards, facing off against the hunters, occupying them once more. They ought to be able to hold them off for long enough for her to make her escape. Just as she was about to make a run for it, her downfall struck. The hunters couldn't target her, preoccupied with fighting her mist forms as they were, but an arrow found itself buried within her chest, standing up defiantly. Sliding in between her ribs as it sunk deep, completely penetrating her heart and emerging from her back. She gaped down in horror at Narit, right arm limp by his side, as his left shoved the arrow in just a little further. Always knew 9 was my lucky number. She heard him whisper, a ghost of a smile on his deathly pale face, as he looked her in the eye. Satisfaction radiating from him even as rage twisted her beautiful features into a demonic snarl, fangs bared. Before she could say anything or get back at him, her soul scattered, fleeing to Tartarus as her body fell apart, disintegrating into golden powder. Narit's vision dimmed, the edges darkening as he fell, as did a falling star. Hope it don't hit us, blacking out before he met the rushing ground. Unknown time later. Narit was in a daze, he didn't know for how long. He just knew he hurt, a lot, everywhere, all at once. His blood seemed to be boiling him from the inside out, he wanted to scream, but he didn't have the energy. His mouth was open, desperately sucking in air in short pained gasps. He cracked open his eyes to try and figure out where he was. He wasn't lying on grass, that's for sure, and he was pretty sure that was the moon. Or maybe it was a light. He could feel someone doing something to him, but his body felt numbed and he was pretty sure he was delirious. Or maybe I'm hallucinating, people don't have two heads. His vision was blurry, was he crying? He could make out vague details, here and there. Orange hair entered and left his field of vision, green chlorophyll-filled eyes hovered over him before a bright light blinded him. He felt something, someone lift his head up and something put into his mouth, nearly all the way to the back of his throat, almost making him gag. A gentle rubbing of his throat made him unconsciously swallow before he felt tiredness overwhelm him as his eyes closed involuntarily and he fell asleep once more. If this is what being dead is like, it hurts a lot more than I thought it would. He couldn't remember what happened, one minute he was fighting Lamia and the next he wound up here. He figured he must have passed out or something. He took a look at himself, well, as good a look as he could get lying on his back and unable to sit up. In a fog of pain, he turned his head to look to his right, the wind blowing the flap to the tent open. He could see the sun as it was setting, turning the sky a beautiful tapestry of yellow and orange, almost like a living portrait. Weird zigzags and spots flashed in his eyes as a wave of nausea took over, the whole world spinning like a top. He wanted to get up to get something to drink, his mouth felt like a desert, but he couldn't move. His entire body felt like lead and he felt so sleepy, just a sec. He thought as he closed his eyes, but as soon as they shut, he passed out again. When he next woke up, he was much more coherent. He was still in lots of pain, his side felt like it was on fire. Where am I? He turned his head to look around, to his right was a bedside table. On it was a cup sitting on a tray with a flask, different from what they normally stored water in. There was some writing on it, moon, the rest was turned away from him. The rest of the tent was empty and the flap closed. This is my tent, how did I get here? He couldn't remember anything after he had shoved his last arrow into Lamia. Brief flashes of light, pain and blurred figures crossed his mind, but none of it made sense to him. He looked down at himself, noting the pressed white sheets that covered him up to his shoulder. He blearily noticed something was on his right arm. Bringing it up and closer to him for inspection, he saw it was in a splint, planks of wood above and below his wrist secured together by white bandages, preventing it from moving around. Oh Yashi. How are you feeling? A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. He gently let his arm fall back to his side as he turned to face whoever had spoken. He saw Phoebe standing at the entrance, letting the flap fall behind her as she entered. He started coughing. The cough racked through his body, his side flaring in pain as his stomach tensed with each cough. Rapid footsteps and a hand cupped his head as he felt a thin tube being pressed past his lips and a cool liquid steadily flowing into his mouth, which he swallowed greedily. When the tube was retracted, he opened his eyes again, seeing Phoebe place the thing on the table as she lowered him back down. She lifted the lid and refilled the cup with what he could now see as moon water. He felt the cool silvery water as it went down his throat, energizing him, dulling the pain he felt in his side. That's neat. He croaked, voice a little hoarse from lack of use. Exclusive to the hunters of Artemis. We do have ambrosia stocked, but since we sometimes pick up mortals, we can't very well give that to them. Phoebe grinned. How are you feeling? She asked again, placing her hand on his forehead, slight frown marring her forehead. Better. Less like an oversized chew toy, he quipped, but winced as the pain in his ribs flared up. My side's the worst, but it's bearable. Where are we? We're back at camp, though we've moved since. She shook her head and snorted, more importantly, you took a beating and a half. Marion Lamia was a very dangerous monster. Especially for someone like you. You're lucky Lady Artemis got to you when she did, she emphasized the last word by flicking his forehead, making him flinch and turn his head away petulantly. Not like I had much of a choice. He muttered, causing Phoebe to sigh. Yeah, that's more or less what Crocale said. Know something? Your hunting knife saved me. At Phoebe's perplexed expression he elaborated. Yeah, I think I dropped my own one when she got me with that magic of hers. Had nothing else on me. You should have seen the look on her face when I cut her hand off, she never suspected I would have another up my sleeve. Well, losing an arm would surprise anyone. Yeah, believe it. He chuckled. Here, lem help you up, got something for you. She leaned forward, picking him up and leaning him against a headboard. Narit grimaced as his side was aggravated but didn't complain. She pulled out a pair of vambraces and a semicircular crown, these are from killing Marion Lamia. She said to his unanswered question. They're pretty powerful, enchanted with loads of magic and spells. Sarah was saying it would take her years if she tried to imbue this much magic into something, and quite a lot of the spells she can't replicate. By rights they're yours, since you killed Marion Lamia, but you don't have to deal with that now, just something to keep in mind. Right now, Lady Artemis would like to speak with you. Think you can get up or do I need to carry you, squirt? She teased. Narit shook his head, you'd love that. He snorted. Gingerly, he eased his legs out from under the covers and struggled to tie his boots on with one hand, immobilized as the other was by the splint. When he emerged from the tent, Phoebe close behind him, he was greeted by the full moon. Its pale light illuminating the camp, their silvery canvases glowing. Everyone was gathered around the campfire, just having finished eating dinner from the looks of things. Lady Artemis herself was stood at the center. Phoebe nudged him forward, straight up to Lady Artemis, silence fell over everyone. Narit, she said coolly, her voice clear over the cackling of the flame, my son, a mix of pride and other emotions entered her voice, you have successfully passed your initiation and gone beyond that to slay Marion Lamia, a powerful monster who we ourselves have attempted to hunt in the past. In light of these events, the time has come for you to officially join the hunt and make history. Are you ready? I am Lady Artemis. I pledge myself to the goddess Artemis. I turn my back on the romantic company women, accept eternal virginhood and join the hunt. It was on that day, 9th of September 1860, Narit, the 7-year-old firstborn son of the goddess of the moon, joined the hunters of Artemis. What if Naruto Eternal Mangekyou Sharingan Percy Jackson, and thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.